IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. We missed y'all yesterday, but we're back today, and it's Wednesday, so that means y'all know we're about to do a midweek rundown. We got a few topics we're going to get into today. We're going to talk some Notre Dame / college football topic at the beginning, Ryan, and we'll talk a little bit about recruiting. We're going to kind of discuss the 5 really must-gets as we look at Notre Dame and this recruiting class and what do they need to do to not only meet needs, but also to kind of have that gap-closing class. Who are the 5 must-gets that they need in this class? And then we're going to talk a little about the Big Ten and this idea that's being floated around about how the Big Ten is going to approve or change their rule. Right now, you have to play a Power 5 non-conference game. They're going to change the rule to eliminate that. How that shows absolute cowardice from the Big Ten, but also just how in college football we continue to see the people that supposedly are the stewards of the game do nothing but destroy it in an attempt to get money grabs. And that's what this is all about. And it disgusts me. And I'll explain what I mean by that, because you may think, well, money grab, but wouldn't it mean playing bigger teams means more money? No, I'll explain. So we'll get into that, Ryan. But we're going to kick today's show off with it's that time of year, Ryan, where you start to see all these lists coming out. Top 25 this, top 10 position groups, top 10 players, all these type of things. And I'm fascinated by these lists every year. They're fun. I mean, they're enjoyable. And so we're gonna look at one of the lists today and kind of just use it as a starting point. We're not going to rip the guy that put the list together too bad. It wouldn't be hard to do. We're just going to kind of use this as a guide to a conversation. And we'll talk about the Notre Dame players that are on these top 10 lists, the Notre Dame players that should be on these top 10 lists. And then in some instances where, there's not a Notre Dame guy that right now looking into the season deserves to be on this list, but who could be on this list by season's end? Or who do we think could be on this list a year from now? So it's going to be for a fun conversation. We're going to focus on offensive position groups today. We'll do defensive position groups next week, Ryan. But we're going to begin with sort of the guys that are on the list from Notre Dame. And we could start in 2 places because there are 2 Notre Dame players that are on list. But we're going to start off at offensive tackle because according to Pro Football Focus, and I've seen several other rankings that are exactly the same way, that have Joe Alt, Notre Dame's Joe Alt, as the number 1 offensive tackle returning for college football. Now, there's a little bit more debate about who may be the number 1 offensive tackle in the draft. There's a little bit more discussion there because that projects tools and things like that. But this is more of who's going to be the best college football player.
Yep.
And in the list that we looked at, Ryan, and in a lot of other lists, it's pretty consistent that Joe Alt's number 1, and I think that's pretty spot on. I think he's the best. He was one of the 3 or 4 best tackles in college football last year, and the only other guys in the conversation are all gone now. They're all in the NFL. So I think that's a no-brainer number 1 selection there.
I mean, it's pretty easy especially when you think that it's a PFF list, obviously, right? And Joe Alt was their number 1 ranked offensive tackle last year. So when you think about returners, grading system obviously is going to be a part of the conversation for a PFF-driven list. And then when you also talk about the accolades that Joe Alt was able to have, like a near consensus All-American on every major platform, every major list that matters. So, I mean, it was a no-brainer, honestly, Brian. I mean, I think that if there was if we're talking about more of the subjective viewpoint, if a guy has that NFL draft background or just kind of a general person in general, I guess, you could have a conversation piece between do you like Olu Fashanu? Do you like someone else a little bit more? Maybe you have a little bias in certain areas. But when you think about PFF, the one thing that it is supposed to be built off of, right or wrong, is the grading system. That's one thing that's supposed to be built off. And clearly, I think that this one is very much driven that way because, I mean, even because we're going to talk about it, breaking it down a little bit, but Olu Fashanu isn't even number 2 on this list, who is pretty much considered, if not the best, the second best offensive tackle returning college football. This is a very PFF grading system centric list that we're looking at. And Joe Alt ending as Pro Football Focus's top offensive lineman in after the 2022 season. Can't say I'm very surprised that he ends up at number 1 on this list. This is not a shocker in any sense.
obviously PFF is going to have their way of doing things, Ryan, and we'll discuss that. But I also want to kind of give our opinion on what we think these rankings should be as well. And so when you look at the top 10 list that Pro Football Focus has, obviously this is an easy one that we agree on. Looking through that list, it is interesting how we have seen this from Pro Football Focus for years. They will just fall in love with certain offensive linemen. I mean, they were dead set adamant that Kane Madden was going to be one of the best interior offensive linemen in college football in 2021. And we kept saying, nope, because they'll just fall in love with these certain guys. And, part of it is you have certain people, you don't have this, there's not a consistent grading system. Now, the system, well, I shouldn't say that. The system is the same, but you have different people applying that system to players, which is going to create some unevenness, let's just say, because it'll be funny because you'll see Notre Dame will play a team and you'll have one guy grading the Notre Dame side of it and then another guy grading the other team. And so you'll look at like Notre Dame will have like 12 pressures allowed. And then the guy that grades the other team will have this say like, well, they had 21 pressures. Well, like, okay, wait, hold on a second. You know what I mean? It won't even have the same number of sacks, same number of quarterback hits. And I'm like, these things, it should not be all that hard to determine. And that's one of the flaws in it. And that's why you can't just only look at a grading system. You also have to be able to use your eyeballs. And when you put your eyeballs on the list, I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer that Joe Walt's the number one tackle on the list. The rest of the list I thought was pretty interesting.
Yep.
And you had Graham Barton from Duke, number 2. You had J.C. Latham from Alabama, number 3. Olu Fashanu from Penn State, number 4. Jonah Monheim from USC, number 5. Will Campbell from LSU, number 6. Kelvin Banks from Texas, number 7. Javon Foster from Missouri, number 8. Taliese Fuega from Oregon State, number 9. He's a pretty good player.
Yes,
and then Jordan Morgan from Oregon, number 10. So, Ryan, just give me some number one. What are some of the ones on that list that really stand out to you as, hey, you nailed that one, or what the heck are you thinking on that one? I will say this. I don't know if I personally like the Fashanu kid. I've seen him more. I like him. I think if I could take any other tackle in college football, he's probably the guy that I would take.
Yeah.
But I can understand why he wouldn't be number one. He's him and Blake Fisher are two guys that I look at. Just consistency is what I need to see a little bit more of from him. But, man, he's really talented. The rest of that list is the Duke kid's, I thought, is pretty good. I like him. Very steady, very physical kid. Okay athlete. There were some that I just had some like head scratchers on there, Ryan, and I want to kind of get some of your thoughts on those, and I'll share some of mine as well. What are some of the ones you liked that you thought they really nailed, and then some of the ones that you look at and say, nah, can't go there with you?
Yeah, this is why this conversation, I think, it's so nuanced, because there's a really fine line between resting on a resume and then projecting a little bit to the 2023 season. I feel like that's a lot of some of these, in my opinion, is like a further projection.
Yeah.
Because I'll be honest, like J.C. Latham should be on the list based upon what he did in 2022, but I do not think he should be number 3 based upon what he did in 2022. I think that the reason that he is so high on this list is because that J.C. Latham has elite level traits. Like, that kid is incredibly gifted, long, athletic, all that. So I think that people are projecting year 2 as a starter, potentially move over to left tackle, obviously with Tyler Steen go into the NFL. I think that you look at him and say he's probably going to take a massive jump forward. So I have no problem with him being on the list. I just think it's more you're projecting a little bit forward if you think that he's the 3rd best returning. That's kind of the only conversation point I have. Olu Fashanu should be there. I think he should be a couple spots higher, to your point. Graham Barton should definitely be included on the list. There's no doubt about that.
That's probably my top 3, by the way. Is Alt, Fashanu, and Barton.
Probably.
I will say this too. I'm okay if you want to do projection moving forward, as long as whenever you're doing a ranking, you're honest about it.
Yes.
Hey, just so you know, we're projecting what we think will be the case in 2023, and then give your reasons why. And there should be a level of what we've seen. Like, you need to at least see a guy do something before you get it. Like, we talked about this before the show about all this hype about, Tywone Malone is going to Ohio State, and, this is a big pickup. And I'm like, based on what? His high school recruiting rankings? Because he hasn't done jack at Ole Miss in 2 years.
Right.
So he's going to not do anything in the SEC and then come to Ohio State and all of a sudden be a dude. Like, okay, maybe, I guess.
If you say so.
Sure. All right, whatevs. But anyway, I just continue on your list. But I do think that top 3. I feel with you. I'm with you on that top 3. Because there's a lot. I mean, honestly, Ryan, I'll say this as you kind of go through the list. I want to put this in people's ears. This isn't a year where there's a lot of proven high-level tackles in college football. There's not.
No.
There's a ton of projection happening here. Kelvin
Yes.
Banks from Texas is another example of a guy that I think we're projecting a little bit. He'd be on my top 10 because he did some nice things last year, but I'm projecting he's going to be a little bit more consistent this year with Kyle Flood. But there's a lot of that on this list, in my opinion.
Well, and he was the next guy I was going to talk about, Brian, was Kelvin Banks, because I was completely fine with him being on the top 10 list because that kid has some incredible ability, right? And you saw it as a freshman, although he's playing on a very underwhelming Texas offensive line. It improved during the course of the year, but it still wasn't a great offensive line in 2022. He was easily the standout as a true freshman. He was the guy that you looked at and said, that guy's going to be a stud. Like, eventually, if he has good coaching in year 2, year 3, he has a chance to be a special football player, because he has, similarly what I was talking about with JC Latham, like, he has just some of those God-given abilities that you just can't teach a kid. Like, you can't. Either you have that length or you don't. Either you have that raw power or you don't. Either you have that athleticism or you don't. And he has all those things where you look at it and say that kid could be a high-level player on the next level. I also loved, and this is probably my greatest omission into the list, was Talisa Fuaga out of Oregon State, man. I love that kid. I'm telling you guys, and I know that it's hard because unless you're a former offensive lineman or you coached offensive line or you have a deep evaluation background, it's tough to nail offensive line evaluations sometimes. That is one of the positions that is probably the hardest to really break down how good a player is just from the naked eye. Fuaga, playing right tackle for Oregon State this past year, number 75. He was listed, I think, on the roster. This has him at 6'6", 326. I think he was even listed heavier than that at Oregon State, man. This kid is a dancing bear at right tackle for Oregon State. But the crazy thing is, Brian, is like you see him on the hoof, you're like, that dude is massive, long arms, big dude. But then you see him in space, you're like, oh, my guy can move a little bit, man. Like, he can move a little bit, right? I love that kid. I really do. I think he is the best player on Oregon State coming back for a team that won 10-plus games last year under Jonathan Smith. I think he's the best football player coming back for that team. Jordan Morgan was a kid for Arizona that made the list. I like that he made the list because he's a really solid football player, good football player. Got hurt in the 2022 season, so I actually thought maybe they would leave him off the list. But when healthy, he is one of the 10 best offensive tackles returning. My biggest question mark in this list was easily, when we go to number 5, was Jonah Monheim out of USC. Yeah. That's my guy, man. Otherwise, most of the names I was okay with. I'm good. There's projection.
I'm okay with. There are some guys that I did feel that should have been on there. For example, I think
there's one for sure.
Go ahead and say it, because I know he's a guy that you're very high on, and I am as well. Go ahead.
Roger Rosengarten, who's a starting right tackle for Washington. One of the I probably would have had him in my top 5, to be honest.
Well, see, and that's my thing. Like, you're talking about all these Pac-12 guys you're okay with, and I'm like, yeah, I'm okay with the kid from Arizona being in there too, but he shouldn't be in there if Roger Rosengarten isn't. Now, again, I can say, okay, he only played a year for them last year, but it's kind of funny where I watch him play, and the Pro Football Focus numbers for him were a little head scratching to me. They had him as the 3rd team All Pac-12 guy last year. I thought he was very good. They had him down for 17 pressures. I didn't see. I mean, there's a couple games, right, where he gave up a lot of pressures that I didn't watch, but I see a guy. I didn't see a guy that gave up that many pressures, and so he's a guy that I think definitely should be on the list. Jonah Monheim, to me, is just, it's a lot like last year. Remember all the Andrew Voorhees? Oh my gosh, this guy's so good, and he was okay. And, he'd have been a 1st-round pick if he didn't get hurt. No, he wouldn't have. I mean, you and I are having this conversation. We've seen the DB from Washington that tore his Achilles and still went round 2. Yeah. We saw Landon Dickerson a couple years ago tore his ACL, last game of the year.
And he had not finished 4 of 5 seasons he played in college due to an injury. I mean, yes.
And still went in the 2nd round, right? Yes. I mean, we've seen this. We've seen, who was the other guy we were talking about? Jameson Williams, wide receiver, tears his ACL in the college football national championship game and still goes in the top 15. Right? I mean, so we've seen this a bunch. And so Andrew Voorhees, if he's a 1st-round talent, he does not fall to round 6. He falls to, at worst, round 3 or 4 at worst.
Yeah.
And so, but you just get that hype on some of these guys that I think is system driven. And when I look at offensive linemen, I don't care about system driven. I care about, are you a high-level football player. And I don't see that from Jonah Monheim. And it just like I didn't see it from Andrew Voorhees. And I like Jonah Monheim. He's a nice player coming out of high school. Notre Dame gave him a look late in the process. But you can't have him in the top 5 and not have Roger Rosengartner on the list at all, in my opinion.
I think that for me, Brian, the Monheim thing is a little bit driven because, sack numbers are always the thing that people go back to. He gave up X amount of sacks. He gave up no sacks on the season. Well, when you're playing with Caleb Williams, who makes magic happen,
Exactly.
I mean, how many sacks should Notre Dame have had against Caleb Williams? How many?
Exactly.
And it's not, I don't think it's very indicative of how good the offensive line was actually when you talk about it was like when Peyton Manning was the quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts and Tom Brady was the quarterback of the New England Patriots. They both got the ball out of their hands so dang quick. They got some offensive linemen paid that maybe were a little bit overrated because they were just that type of football player. Caleb's different in the fact that he's an extender compared to those guys. But the fact of the matter is it's just hard to get Caleb Williams on the ground, man. It's just hard. And I just think that the sack totals are a little bit skewed in that sense.
And they had him down for 21 pressures. I mean, even on their own system, he didn't give up any sacks or hits, which, again, Pro Football Focus also claims that Jarrett Patterson never gave up a sack in 4 years. And I mean, that's just not accurate. You know what I mean? But, Blake Fisher gave up 17 pressures. He just gave up more sacks. Well, again, I think that's as much quarterback related as is anything else. Like you said, there were times Notre Dame brought multiple guys free and they didn't get a touch on Caleb Williams. Why?
Yes.
It had nothing to do with Jonah Monheim or Andrew Voorhees or anybody else. It was about Caleb Williams. So,
100%.
He's one now. Now, let's talk about Blake Fisher, though, Ryan, as we kind of get ready to move on to the next one. Yep. I'm okay with Blake Fisher not being on this list.
Yeah.
Just because with Blake Fisher, he does even like a Kelvin Banks is a guy that I need to see more consistency from. Even Roger Rosengarten is a guy, even as a redshirt freshman last year, I need to see a little bit more consistency from. Olu Fashanu, I need to see more consistency from. I think the thing that separates Joe Alt, the kid from Duke, is what you're going to get snap after snap after snap, right? There's a level of consistency there. But Blake has got to be more consistent. And I'll say this, it will not shock me at all if by the end of the season we're having a conversation about how Blake Fisher is one of the 10 best offensive tackles in college football. I mean, it would not shock me at all. And I expect him to be in that conversation. But I am okay with him not being on there right now. And I got him on that list. And I'll tell you, here's another guy that I'm going to make a little bit of a prediction, Ryan. And I think you're going to like this prediction.
Yeah.
Another guy that is not on this list, should not be on this list because he has not played well enough. Mm-hmm. But I think will be on this list when the season is over. Miles Hinton for Michigan. You give him good coaching and a good system to play in, his game is going to take off because he's a lot like Blake Fisher. His flashes are really impressive, really impressive. And I think playing in that system, I mean, we've talked about this, Ryan, where they don't have like a lot of stars on that offensive line. He's the most talented kid they will have had in a couple of years.
Yeah.
I mean, and he completely shut down Notre Dame. He completely dominated Isaiah Foskey last year in that matchup. And he hadn't played in a month. Comes back and he plays, and Miles and Walter Rouse is out that game. And then all of a sudden, just like that, he just completely shuts down and dominates Isaiah Foskey. So that's a guy that I think could end up being on this list when it's all said and done. And that's a big projection, Ryan, because he's very inconsistent. But his good film, his top 10 good plays are going to be among the 5 best in offensive tackles in college football, just like Blake Fisher. It's just the consistency isn't there yet.
I think the new situations are a great point, though, Brian. I mean, you just mentioned another guy, too, that's in a different situation. Walter Rouse is going to be working with Bill Bedenbaugh.
One of the best in the business.
And, I mean, Walter Rouse is also he's not quite as talented as Miles Hinton, in my opinion, but he's still a very talented football player. If you can get the best out of Walter Rouse in 1 year at Oklahoma, I think he has a chance to be on this list. Another guy I would say as well, because I agree. Look, Blake Fisher, I'm surprised. Like, I'm sure that he maybe would have been included in like an honorable mention list, maybe in this situation, because this list does gravitate towards upside, right? And it's hard to not look at Blake Fisher and be like, that dude has tremendous upside. Other guy, Ruben Fothery out of Texas A&M, is a guy that I think could make a huge jump.
Boy.
He was really good as a freshman 2 years ago. Actually had his best game of the season was against Will Anderson, man. He had a really good game against Alabama. This past year, I felt like he got a little bit caught in the fact that, like, this offense was just a mess last year. It was just absolutely a mess. Hopefully he takes a nice step as a junior because he is another kid that has a lot of God-given traits. He is a similar-ish football player, a little bit taller, but he reminds me a little bit like Blake Fisher because he's a wide dude, massive, very explosive, better in the run game than he is in the pass game at times. But I really think Reuben Father is another guy, along with Walter Rouse and Miles Hinton, to your point, that could be on the list by year's end. And Blake Fisher should be in that conversation as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing some people project Blake as a first-round draft pick next year. I mean,
Yeah.
again, if you're going to talk about projection, he's got the talent to be so. So it's going to be fun. I think this list is going to look way different by season's end. Like this list, probably as much as any of on that we've looked at, Ryan, is going to be way different by season's end than it is right now.
I think so. And I also think that I think it's tough for some people to be able to really break down offensive line film. I mean, that's one of those positions, Brian, for me, where I usually watch more film on offensive linemen than I do for just about every other position, because I think it's just such a nuanced position, right? Like you need to watch so much more film on those guys and be able to really kind of decipher their strengths, because offensive lines are really built to be cohesive, right? Really built to work in a group. And sometimes it's hard to isolate traits on this guy's a really good football player. He's on a bad offensive line. He was off for one game. He was able to cycle back. I mean, if you watched, for instance, like if you watched the offensive line for Notre Dame the first couple games of the season, you probably would have came away and been like, none of those guys are any good, right? Like they're not very good. But by the end of the season, you're like, nah, they were good. They were just, it was just a situational.
I would say like by game 4, you started. I'll say this: second half of Cal, you started to see it. Like it started. Okay, here they go. Here we go. And then as they kind of moved on by North Carolina and then BYU, you started to see a line that was starting to get there, starting to figure it out. Yeah. Let's move to quarterback, Ryan, because there was also a quarterback from Notre Dame on this list. And I'll tell you that the quarterback rankings this year are very interesting. And this particular one from Pro Football Focus, top 2 made sense. Caleb Williams, number 1, Drake May, number 2. That's how I'd have it. They had Jordan Travis, number 3, Michael Penix, number 4, Bo Nix, 5, Jaden Daniels, number 6, and then Sam Hartman down at 7, right in front of J.J. McCarthy, who they had at 8, KJ Jefferson at 9, and then Michael Pratt from Tulane at 10. This was a very interesting list, Ryan. Let's rehash what we've talked about before. Yep. You and I both we had a discussion about this a month or so ago, and we both believe Sam Hartman should be a top 5 quarterback. If we're taking draft out of the equation, just looking at college football quarterbacks, Sam Hartman's a top 5 quarterback. We can discuss, should he be ahead of or behind Michael Penix? Should be ahead of or behind Jordan Travis? I think you had him 5th, I believe, and I had him 4th. And, and I think I think you can make a better case he should be 3 instead of 5, just based on what we have seen, the production that we have seen. And it was interesting reading the list. You'd basically think that the only reason for his production, if you read what Max Chadwick wrote, the only reason for his production was the slow mesh, right? And it's like, okay, sure, whatever you say, buddy. But, to me, I'm good with 1 and 2. Michael Penix, based on what he did last year, he was excellent, system-driven to a degree, but he executes that system at a very high level. And then you get down to the conversation of who should be ahead, Jordan Travis or Sam Hartman at 4 and 5. To me, Sam Hartman versus Jordan Travis, head-to-head matters. He's 2-0. Sam Hartman's 3-0 against Florida State, 2-0 against Jordan Travis, including, outplaying him last year. And I still feel like just the overall production, the overall yards per game, the total yards, all of that favors Sam Hartman. And now you're going to have Sam Hartman's going to have – last year, you couldn't say that Sam Hartman had better talent all around than what Florida State had, because Florida State and Ohio and Wake Forest both had really good receiving cores, right? And we'll talk about one of Florida State's. Yeah. But running back and offensive line, it's not even close. It's a major advantage to Florida State. But that was kind of the thing for me. Now he's going to have that. So if we're projecting plus what we have seen, that combination to me is why I think I'd be comfortable with Sam Hartman, very comfortable with him at 4. But he's certainly top 5, and there's no way I'm putting Jaden Daniels ahead of him and Bo Nix ahead of him. That's a big thing for me.
I think that this is where I think quarterbacks get a really cloudy conversation for me from this list, because it's a driven list off of the analytics side of things, right? Off of the grades. And you're seeing a couple dual threats that are ahead of Sam Hartman, right? So I think that really I think that is an imperfect science for me, Brian, because Sam Hartman could do some stuff with his legs, but he is a pocket passer, right? That can do some extension. And I feel like he would get drugged down in this list a little bit because his rushing grades probably aren't as high as what Jordan Travis's are, what Jaden Daniels are, for
Right.
instance, right? So I think that it's just an imperfect science because, yeah, Sam Hartman's a much different player than Jaden Daniels, than Jordan Travis. It doesn't make one better or worse, but I think that these lists get skewed to the rushing grades a little bit on the quarterback conversation.
Yeah, and I think improperly so, because as you mentioned, he's not the dynamic run throw guy that those guys are. But here's the reality of it: here. What are we looking at here? Are we looking at style points, or are we looking at production? And when you look at it from a production standpoint, it's not close. The production from Sam Hartman is significantly better than what it is from Jordan Travis. Jordan Travis last year, total offense. So we're not even looking at just passing yards, total offense, because again, you need to count rushing yards. Rushing yards count. Sure. It's like you get a bonus points if it's rushing yards, or bonus points because it's passing yards. Yards are yards. 10 yards is 10 yards, right? Still a first down, no matter how you get it. But Jordan Travis last year averaged 279.3 total yards per game. Yep. And he accounted for 32 touchdowns, because he had a receiving touchdown, which is pretty impressive.
I saw that one on film the other day, too. It was pretty nice. Yeah.
Sam Hartman averaged 319.2 yards per game and accounted for 39 touchdowns, playing behind a not very good offensive line. The year before, he played behind a better offensive line, in my opinion, and he had 11 rushing touchdowns and triple the yards and averaged 327.9 yards per game. So to me, the production far outweighs. And you can say, okay, this guy ran, this guy doesn't run, whatever the case may be. But and Jordan Travis had even more yards per game than Jaden Daniels. So again, Jaden Daniels accounted for 29 touchdowns last year. Sam Hartman accounted for 39. It's not even close. The production is not even close. And now you're going to put Sam Hartman on a better team. It's like the Pro Football Focus ranking was almost like they were punishing him for going to Notre Dame, as if he's not going to be as good now at Notre Dame because he's not in that slow mesh offense anymore. Last I checked, all the best coaches in America aren't beating down their door trying to steal Warren Ruggiero away from Dave Clawson.
I don't think people actually understand what the slow mesh is either sometimes, but that's another conversation for another
That's
day.
a very astute observation there, Ryan. But he's clearly in the top 5 for me and you. And we've talked about that. Let's talk about some other guys on this list, Ryan. Just give some of your thoughts on, obviously, 1, 2, 3 you and I are comfortable with. Although in this, I like Jordan Travis a lot. I do. I think Jordan Travis is a very good football player. I can't justify having Jordan Travis third.
No, he'd be in the top 10 for sure. There's no doubt. But
I think he's top 5 guy, in my opinion, as far as just college football player. He's in my 5, but I can't justify having him third. I really can't. You're just not going to be able to make a convincing argument for me that he should be the third quarterback on this list.
Agree.
Yeah.
Agree. Well, and if we move further down the list too, Brian, JJ McCarthy at 8 is like, I get it, man. He was on a winning team. He was a catalyst for the winning team. He played his best football in the biggest game of not the biggest game of the year, but he played some of his best football in one of the biggest games of the year. I get it.
From Ohio State.
Ohio State. Yeah. But I just seems a little bit too high for me. I'd rather him maybe be a 10 with a little bit of an asterisk. Like, he's a second-year starter now. More is going to be on his plate potentially, hopefully, and be able to get to see the best of JJ McCarthy. I just don't think he's the 8th best quarterback in college football right now. Like, that's just kind of where I am with him.
I agree. I think a lot of that's projection. I think that if you're going to tell me, because here's the thing, when you read what he said about JJ, he talks about he sees the job. He goes, he thrives outside of the original play design. Okay. McCarthy's 5 passing touchdowns outside of structure were tied with Drake May and trailed only Caleb Williams and Bryce Young among Power 5 quarterbacks. Like, okay, that's fine. But you need to say in there, like, hey, this is some projection here, right? We're projecting this a little bit.
Yes.
And to me, that's the only way you can justify having him ahead of KJ Jefferson. That's it. I mean, I think KJ Jefferson, I was actually just glad they had him in the top 10, to be honest with you. I didn't think they were going to have him in the top 10. So I was happy to see that. But, to me, like I'm seeing him in the first round of the draft and all this other kind of stuff, and just some of the stuff that I'm seeing is just like, okay, like, and here's the thing, it's not even anti JJ McCarthy thing, right?
No,
Like,
no, he's
but
talented.
here's the problem with it. Y'all are going to put so much pressure and expectations on this kid. It's going to get to the point where he's going to have a hard time living up to those expectations. And that's the problem. You're going to ask this guy to go out and carry your football team, and because ESPN had him 8th as well, and we talked about that. But you have him elite. But I'll say this, and here's where I'll defend PFF. They had KJ Jefferson on there, and when you look at the ESPN list, I'm actually going to look this up. I'm pretty sure, yeah, they had KJ Jefferson 12th on their list. Michael Pratt 15th. A guy that I have on my top 10 list, if we're just talking about college football quarterbacks, and this is probably a little bit of a bias for me, I love watching Frank Harris play. If I'm going to have a non-Power 5 quarterback on my list, with all due respect to Michael Pratt, it's going to be Frank Harris. I mean, that he is fun to watch, and he's a passer. I think there's this misconception that he's a runner. He's a passer.
Yeah.
I mean, that guy can go to football a ton. He threw for 4,600 yards last year. 4,600 yards. He is a lot of fun to watch. Also he had passed for 4,000 yards last year, and also ran for 600 yards last year. For UTSA, he's a fun kid, and I don't know. Did you watch him play at all against Texas, Ryan? His team wasn't very good, but he belonged on that field that day.
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
He played good football that day. So I really like Frank Harris. He's a lot of fun to watch.
He got a lot better from the year before too. Like if I remember correctly, he was good his year before, but he really turned into one of the more consistent passers in college football last year. I was actually okay with Michael Pratt being on the list because, again, Brian, if we're talking about a little bit of projection here, 12-2 last year as a team. They obviously had a big bowl victory over USC, which he came back in dramatic fashion. Michael Pratt had his most productive season last year, and I think you look at him and say they're losing their running back that was obviously a great player for them. Now he's going to have an opportunity to be the guy on the offense consistently. So I think he has a chance to take a huge jump.
Here's the question to your point. Can he carry the offense that way? And that's always been kind of my big knock on Michael Pratt. And it's very similar. I feel very similar about what we're going to say. What I'm saying about him is very similar to what I say about JJ McCarthy. Is, he's a guy that's just been asked to run the offense. I mean, that's what he does, run the offense, and he does that well. And, but when I watched him against USC, he made some great plays with his legs, but even in that game, he missed some open targets. I mean, he went 8 of 17 in that game. Now his 8 went for 234, 234 yards, but that to me had as much to do with USC's defense being awful as it did anything else. I have concerns, Ryan, about his ability to really put a team on his shoulders and carry him without Sharp leading that ground attack. We'll see. I hope he does, because I like the kid. I mean, he's got a big arm. He's got talent. I just don't know if I'm ready to have him in there. And KJ Jefferson is a guy that if he stays healthy this year is going to be a lot of fun to watch, in my opinion. Now, I am a little concerned about the change in offensive coordinator for him and how that's going to affect them, because now it's Dan Enos as opposed to Kendall Briles. So I'm very curious about that, but he would be a guy in my list. Here's a guy that nobody talks about that I think is, if you haven't watched him play, he's fun to watch. Jaden DeLora from Arizona. He's not in my top 10, Ryan, but he's a fun player to watch. He really is. He's a fun player to watch.
Two guys that I think could be on this list by the end of the year. One is actually Jaden DeLora, transfer from Washington State. I think Cameron Ward could have a big jump this year as his second year under Washington State. He's going to be a senior, a fourth-year player this year after transferring over from Incarnate Word. I think that he could take a massive jump. I also think Riley Leonard from Duke is going to be a guy that by the end of the season could be on this list. I mean, he had a really nice redshirt freshman year last year, or sophomore year. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to redshirt because of the quarterback issues the year before. So as a sophomore, though, he threw for over 20 touchdowns, obviously led Duke to a 9-win season in the first year under Mike Elko. And he also was a very good rushing member on the team. I think he ran for over 700 yards and had double-digit touchdowns in that area too. So I really think that Cameron Ward could be a guy that takes a massive jump. And I think Riley Leonard has that second year starter maturation that you typically see. And I think that he's going to have a big season for Duke.
Yeah, he's fun to watch. And then, of course, there's guys that have new homes that have had big years in the past. How does Devin Leary do at Kentucky? How does Brennan Armstrong do at NC State? Those will be guys in the conversation. Does Joe Milton's production equal his arm strength? Because you're going to hear a lot of talk about him. Is Austin Reed a system guy, or is he actually a big-time quarterback right now? I chalk him up as a system guy, to be honest with you. He's not a guy, but he's going to get his chances this year as well. And then Spencer Rattler is another guy that okay, are we going to get the guy that ended the season that way and has the big hype, or are we going to get the guy that spent most of the year being very up and down? I think he's very up and down, and I can't have him on my list. Here's the last guy that I think by the end of this season is going to be on this list, and will definitely be on this list when we go into next year. Cade Klubnik from Clemson will be on this list next year. There's no doubt. I don't know if he'll be a top 10 quarterback by the end of this season, but when you take away Caleb Williams to the NFL, Drake May to the NFL, Sam Hartman to the NFL, Michael Penix to the NFL, and these guys kind of move on, and then we put this list together next year, I fully expect to see him on the list next year, to see Cade Klubnik on that list. I think the thing that's going to hurt him a little bit this year is the talent around him is not what the last two big-time quarterbacks that Clemson had. It's just not. He doesn't have the receiving core that those guys had, but he's a really good football player as well. Just young and unproven. And if I was going to put him in my list now, Ryan, it would be based off of recruiting rankings, and I just don't do that. But I think that's what I'm saying. But by next season, he's going to be on that list for me.
I'll say this. The two teams that I think will not be included on this list is any quarterback that plays for Florida and any quarterback that plays for Auburn. I'm gonna strike those guys from the list.
Yeah. Well, although what's funny is, of course, now Peyton Thorne transferred to Auburn, a guy that ESPN never talks about. Now all of a sudden it's like this guy that's going to get Auburn turned around, and I'm like, what are we doing here? What are we doing here?
Sure.
And here's the last very intriguing guy, a guy that I think will be on the list by the end of the year. That is going to tick a lot of people off. I really think Quinn Ewers is going to be on this list by the end of the year. I do.
Possible.
Possible. Look,
him Drew Aller is another guy that maybe could pop
from Penn State. Here's my thing with Ewers. Okay, number one, he basically should have been a freshman last year. I mean, if you look at the class he was supposed to come in with, he should have been a freshman last year.
Yeah.
And I feel like what's happened is we've now gone from one extreme to another with him. And the result is going to be him allowed to just kind of go play football.
Right.
Where, we're hearing stupid things like greatest prospect ever, highest grade ever of a high school quarterback, blah, blah, blah. Just total clickbait nonsense that hurts this kid, in my opinion. Yeah. And to a degree, I think he kind of bought into that a little bit, Ryan. Sure. I do. And then he goes to Texas. He gets not humiliated. He gets humbled, is what I meant to say, a little bit by how he played last year. Didn't have the big moments that he wanted to. He gets hurt, gets knocked out, comes back, has a really good game against Oklahoma. And you're thinking, okay, here we go. And then he just kind of against Iowa State, some bad turnovers and a loss to Oklahoma State. Doesn't do a whole lot in the win over Kansas State. He wasn't the primary driver of that. Really plays poorly against TCU, plays poorly against Kansas, plays poorly against Baylor. And then statistically had a great game against Texas or against Washington. And if it's not for Xavier Worthy dropping a bomb, I mean, he has really good numbers in that game. But, okay, Washington's defense isn't that good.
Yeah.
But I just kind of felt like you started hearing people just assuming that Arch Manning was going to come in and beat him out. And you watch the spring game and you read reports from people down there that I trust, and they're like, it wasn't close. Right now, part of that is because Arch was overrated. And I don't mean that disrespect. I think Arch Manning's a good football player. I just think this nonsense of him being number one overall player, 5-star kid, it was too much. And, Malik Murphy has a really good spring. I just feel like he's now out of the spotlight a little bit. I haven't seen a list yet that has him as a top 10 quarterback. And I think that's going to allow him to kind of come out and be a pretty good football player. And here's the big thing. I think this is the best Texas offensive line we're going to see under Steve Sarkisian so far this season, because you've got some of those younger kids, Kelvin Banks, some of these other younger kids are now going into year 2 and year 3 starters. I like Kyle Flood a lot as a coach. I don't know if they're going to be a sexy offense this year, like some people think, but I think Quinn Ewers is going to be a good football player. I think he's going to be a top 10 quarterback this year. I really do.
He's got a lot of firepower to work with, man.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking about Jatavion Sanders at one point, this podcast. We're talking about Xavier Worthy. They had the Isaiah Nayer kid who transferred over from Wyoming last year, is a really good football player, but got hurt in the preseason last year. I know they had the kid that transferred from Georgia as well, the speedster that transferred over there. So they got some guys,
you're talking
man.
about the kid that I'm
The
drawing a
Mitchell
blank on his
kid.
name. Yeah, Mitchell.
Adonai Mitchell.
Yeah. And he stepped up in some big moments. I just need to see those guys do it first. And I have some questions about their run game, to be honest with you. And I know they got some highly ranked guys coming in, but I mean, Bijan Robinson and Roshan Johnson are very big shoes to fill.
Yes.
At that position. But I think Quinn Ewers will be in that conversation when it's all said and done. Let's move over to running back, Ryan. This is an interesting one because we're going to go through this list, and this is one we're going to definitely have a big debate on. Not so much you and I against each other, but you and I against the rankings. So they had Blake Corum from Michigan, number 1. I'm good with that. Quinshon Judkins from Ole Miss, number 2. I'm good with that. Raheem Rocket Sanders at number 3 from Arkansas. I'm okay with that. Now we get into where it's a little bit more debatable. Bucky Irving from Oregon, number 4. Braylon Allen from Wisconsin, number 5. Trey Benson from Florida State, number 6. Nicholas Singleton from Penn State, number 7. Mayan Williams from Ohio State, number 8. Donovan Edwards from Michigan, number 9. And then Frank Gore Jr., number 10. There's a lot here, Ryan, that we're going to get into. But first, obviously, there is no Notre Dame player in the top 10. There should be, in my opinion. When I look at the top 10 running back lists, I mean, I'm seeing lists, Ryan, that are going 20 deep and don't mention Audric Estime. And this is an example of they make assumptions about Notre Dame. They don't actually watch film, in my opinion.
Right.
And so to me, I saw a list from On3 where they had Jarquez Hunter, number 5, but no Audric Estime.
My question would be what is Audric Estime's PFF grade? That would be my question, because I think that's all.
Well, the thing is, it's not just Pro Football Focus though. That's the thing. Like ESPN came out with a top 10 running backs list, and they didn't have them on it either. They had Corum 1, Junkins 2, Sanders 3, consistency. Nick Singleton 4, that's more accurate. Donovan Edwards 5, no. Braylon Allen 6, Bucky Irving 7, Will Shipley 8. Trey Benson 9, and then Frank Gore tied with him at 9. So that was your top 10. So they didn't have him in there either. And Frank Gore, to me, is a nice little power group of 5 running back, right? He had 3 100-yard games last year. He went for like 17 yards on 7 carries against Texas, I think last year is what we looked at before, Ryan.
Yep.
He's a kid that had over 300 yards rushing in a bowl game.
Yes, he did. 15.4 yards a carry in that one.
Right. That's great. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Good for him. He went for 178 yards in the opener against Liberty and did not have another 100-yard rushing game until the end of the regular season against Louisiana Monroe. He went for 199, and then he went for 329 in the bowl game against Rice. He only had 2 games of over 90 yards in between there in the group of 5. So he ends up with 1,382 yards because of that big game at the end. And I'm thinking, how in the world are you going to have that kid ahead of Audric Estime? And again, we're not even really having to project Audric Estime, Ryan. Just look at what he did last year. He was a 1,000-yard player last year. He had over 1,000 yards of total offense because he also had almost 200 yards receiving. I'll be honest with you. This is one of those ones I get really annoyed by. I get very annoyed by. What would Audric Estime do playing against a group of 5 teams for an entire season? Honestly, come on. What it's absurd, man. It's absurd. And now these same people are going to hype up how Logan Diggs is this, big time back, and SEC teams are fighting over him. And I saw 247 was like he's the top back, arguably the top back on the market. I'm like, yeah, and he couldn't even beat out Audric Estime. You know what I mean? And that's not a shot on Logan Diggs. Everybody knows I'm a very pro Logan Diggs guy. It's just the point of how are you going to have a top 10 list and have Frank Gore Jr. on there? And we know why. It's the name. I get all that.
Oh yeah, 100%. It's good play.
Yeah, but you're not going to have Audric Estime on that list. I mean, he's a hammer. Okay, here's Audric Estime from game 4 on yards per carry: 7'9", 6'9", 7'1", 5'7", 6'2", 5'8", 6'1", 6'5", 7'2", 6'8". In the last 9 games of the regular season, Audric Estime's lowest yards per play total was 5.7, and he only had that low because he only had 3 carries against UNLV because he was fumbling the ball. You know how many fumbles he had after that?
0.
0. So all his fumbles came in the first 6 games. So even while splitting carries, he averages 5.9 yards per carry, runs for 922 yards, has 11 touchdowns, and has 135 yards receiving on 9 catches, which puts him over 1,000 yards on the season.
Yep.
So I'm having a hard time. And now, if you're going to project, he's not going to be splitting carries with Logan Diggs this year. So you can't have a running back list in the top. This is the only other guy on offense that we're going to say it's BS. He's not on this list. I'm cool with no other Notre Dame players being on the other positions on offense.
Yep.
Audric Estime has to be on this list. We saw it. We watched the Clemson Notre Dame game. Will Shipley was the third best running back on the field that day, right?
Yep.
I mean, so we've seen them play against each other. And I like Will Shipley, but Frank Gore Jr. should not be on the list over Audric Estime.
Will Shipley would be on my list though with Estime. He would be on this list for me. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. And PFF doesn't have him on their top 10. Doesn't have Will Shipley on their top 10.
Which is weird. Which is very weird. I feel like he would be a good person for clicks as well because he's a white running back from Clemson, right? Like there's a little bit of clickbait.
Well, that's a position where it's not an ideal situation. But yeah, I mean, and to your point, Will Shipley. And here's the thing that works for Will Shipley and Audric Estime for me is you got to look at what those guys did with very little help. Yes. And Will Shipley rushes for 1,100 yards, 5.6 a carry, 15 touchdowns last year. Also has 242 receiving yards and 38 catches. Also returned 14 kicks for 324 yards with very little help in the passing game. Very little help in the passing game. And, you look at that and say, boy, this, I mean, Will Shipley's really the only reason they were even in the South Carolina game by the second half. I mean, he went off in that game. So he should be on the list. Audric Estime should be on the list. Now, guys that should not be on the list, Frank Gore Jr. is an easy one for me.
Yep.
And I know Ohio State fans are not going to like this, but I wouldn't have Mayan Williams on the list either.
I wouldn't either. It doesn't make him not a good football player. It's just
good numbers, but he won't even be their number one running back this year
if
Henderson's healthy.
Well, that's what I was going to say is he even going to be the lead ball carrier if Travion's healthy? Like that's the big thing. I mean, I would say this too, Brian. I think there's just a couple kids that are just a little bit too high. Like I thought Bucky Irving had a really good year for Oregon this past year, but he's more of a 7 to 10 type of player on this list, in my opinion. Like he's a good player though, man. Like there's no doubt about it. Like I just think he's a little bit too high on this list. Yeah. Nicholas Singleton's a little bit too low.
He's a system guy. Bucky, real quick too, is a bit of a system guy for me as well. He's a good running back, right? But 1,058 yards. It's good. 13 games. That's good production.
It is.
He's a guy that to me was pretty good the second half of the year. All 4 of his 100-yard games came in the second half of the year. But I just have always kind of felt like he was a little bit of a system guy to me, and he benefits from the fact that he has a very mobile quarterback working with him. They had a nice 1-2 punch at running back last year with him and Noah Whittington. So I think that helps. But to your point, there's no planet where I'm going to have Bucky Irving, who you said, I mean, are we arguing that Bucky shouldn't be on this top 10 list? We're not arguing that.
No.
He should not be ahead of Nicholas Singleton.
He's also, Bucky's also a really good receiver, which helps him obviously. But yes, Nick Singleton should be higher.
Yeah, 31 catches, 299 yards, by the way, just to point out. That's good. That's really good production from a running back in the receiving game, 31 catches. But Will Shipley had 38.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, in that offense for Oregon, I think it's really impressive too, because that's a heavy RPO system, obviously, right? So it's not like he's a traditional pass game weapon all the time. I really did like Trey Benson on this list, Brian. Yeah. I got my eyes really on him. Like I watched him during the season, but I got like some coaches' eyes on him the other day, man. And this stat, I always hate these stats sometimes because I'm like, I don't know if that's very accurate, but the 51% tackle breaking ability, which basically means over 51% of the people that try to tackle him miss him. Don't break him down. I think it's legitimate, man. I watched a couple of games. I'm like, oh, this dude is just making dudes miss left and right. Trey Benson's really good. And if we're talking about the projection thing, the backup Ward is no longer on the team anymore. So he's a guy that's probably even going to get more carries in 2023.
Yeah, he'll get more. Loans Toafili, if he's still there. I have to go back and look at that one. He obviously is he's a guy too that I think will get more carries as well. But to your point, I think Trey Benson's going to have a nice jump this year, and I think their passing game is going to get even a little bit better this year as well. So the two Michigan backs I have a hard time with, just because Donovan Edwards, I like Donovan Edwards, and part of me wants to not have him on there, and then I just kind of feel like it. But then I look at the numbers and like he rips up Penn State, he rips
Yeah.
up Ohio State, he produces in the postseason, and it's like okay, he belongs on there. Like I had a hard time like with the number 2 back being on there, but then you're like, yeah, but if you put him on any other team, he's 1,300 yards and he's on the list. So I
I think down the stretch too. I think the one good thing for Michigan, obviously they didn't want Blake Corum to get hurt, but I think that made them. I would think that it's going to make them very more understanding of like, hey, we can give Donovan Edwards a little bit more of a workload earlier in this year, and we can really split carries a little bit more so that Blake Corum isn't broken down by the end of the season.
If you can have both of them healthy by November, you're going to be pretty dangerous. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. They're the only team right now that I would say deserves 2. Like there's a lot of people putting Ohio State on there. I just can't get there with Ohio State's guys right now. They've got to prove to me that they can stay healthy and produce in some of the bigger moments. That's really what I need to see from them. Travion Henderson 2 years ago, no brainer to be on this list. But he didn't even look that. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he was hurt all year. He didn't really impress me early in the season. He had a nice game against Wisconsin, But the other thing too with Ohio State, even like, and this is not true of Michigan, in my opinion. I feel like it's like it's going to produce your stats, and a lot of times maybe some hollow stats when you look at because of how teams defend their run game, because you have to spend so much time defending the pass that I mean they just get a lot of big open holes. Just scheme driven, not even the O-line's great, just scheme driven. And I kind of feel like, yeah, they had good numbers, but if you put like Donovan Edwards or Blake Corum in that system with that pass game and that run scheme, their numbers would be even greater. And that's kind of the way I look at it.
I caught a lot of flack on draft Twitter a couple years ago, Brian, when I was like, I don't really think Trey Sermon's that great of a player. I just think he has some wide open rushing lanes, and people are like, "Oh man, he ran for 300 yards in the whatever, the Big Ten championship game." I'm like, I understand, I hear you, and then all of a sudden he's a 3rd round pick and he hasn't produced in 2 years in the NFL. Like that's just kind of what I think.
Right. And then he had a couple big games, right? Big game against Northwestern, big game against Clemson. I mean, Master Teague had production in that offense, and he's not that great of a running back either. I mean, he's a guy that had 789 yards and 5.8 yards per carry in 2019. And, it's a very system-driven run game to me.
I will say if you can guarantee me Travion Henderson healthy all year, that he could maybe be a top 5 back on this list by the end of the season. Like I think he has that type of talent.
Travion's the only one that I would have that conversation about. He just has to prove to me he can be healthy. If somebody wanted to project him to being healthy and being their lead back this year, I wouldn't argue with that. But Mayan Williams,
incredibly talented.
Mayan Williams, where he's been, I can't. And because the other thing too is Travion is a legit weapon in the pass game. Legit weapon in the pass game. Like he is dangerous in the pass game. And he wasn't last year a ton because of the injuries. He only caught 4 passes for 28 yards. And that's a kid that had 27 catches for 312 yards receiving in 2021 as a freshman, on top of 1,255 rushing yards and 15 touchdowns. So he's just got to prove he can stay healthy. That's going to be the big thing. But if he's healthy, if you're going to tell me he's going to be healthy and he's going to say, okay, bam, here we go, he's going to be healthy all year, I'd say, okay, yeah, put him in the top 10 and close to the top 5. I mean, he's that kind of talent. And then you put him in the system, and you're going to get your production.
I'm still so confused. I've already said this player, but I don't get the Will Shipley non-love on this list, to be honest. I mean, he was a former high recruit. He was very productive last year, and he plays for a big brand in Clemson. Like, I'm just very confused on why he is not included in this list. I'm very confused. I'm very confused.
You know why he's not on this list.
I mean, man, it's just insane, brother. It's insane.
You know why he's not on this list.
He's the white hope, man. He's the white hope.
Not at this position. But Audric Estime, though, at the end of the day, he needs to be on this list, and I think he will be. But I can just see it now, though, Ryan, can't you? Like, he starts running for a bunch of yards, and it's, well, of course he's running for yards. He's got, Sam Hartman's protecting him now, and he's got Blake Fisher and Joe Alt and blah. They're going to talk his numbers down.
Yeah.
And I was talking with a Division I running back recently, and he was talking about, like, I just don't see it with him. And I'm just like, look, man, I don't know what to tell you, but here's what I know. That dude rips people up when he gets the football. That's all I know.
Yes.
Right. So, he's a guy that should be on that list.
A potential breakout is, I already mentioned him a little bit, but the Ward kid, I forget his first name, that played behind Trey Benson last year for Florida State. He's in Kansas State now, so he'll be taking over that mantle of what Deuce Vaughn was doing in that offense potentially. So I think he could have a really nice season. Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be fun to see. You're talking about Trayshawn Ward, right?
Trayshawn Ward. Yep.
Trayshawn Ward actually averaged more yards per carry last year than Trey Benson did. He averaged 6.6 yards per carry and 7 touchdowns last season, and he's a veteran guy. So he's been around. He had over 1,000 yards in the 2 previous seasons combined. Ryan.
Yep.
Hit over 500 in 2021, over 600 last year, and I think that's a system built for his skill set. In my opinion, short, quick slasher back. Guy that can hit some home runs. He's very much built for that system. Yep. I could see that. I could certainly see that. That's a good call on that one. Let's go over to wide receiver, Ryan. This is an interesting one as well. If you have a top 10 receiver list in college football, and it does not include having Marvin Harrison number 1, you should no longer be putting out lists for football players. And this one has Marvin Harrison number 1. So
I was going to say, lucky for Max Chadwick, he does it, so he's good.
Yes. You have number 2. You have Emeka Egbuka at number 2. Roma Dunze at number 3. Xavier Worthy at 4. Malik Neighbors from LSU at 5. Jalen McMillan from Washington at 6. You have Johnny Wilson from Florida State at 7. Dorian Singer from USC at 8. Ladd McConkey at Georgia at 9. And then Malachi Corley at Western Kentucky at number 10. Lot of thoughts on this one, Ryan. I have a lot of thoughts, and I'm going to begin just kind of working my way down. Emeka Egbuka is a good football player and absolutely belongs on this list. I've seen a lot of people put him 2 and 3, and I just can't go there. If you want to say top 5 and be at the bottom of the top 5, I wouldn't argue with you. I wouldn't even have him in the top 5, just to be honest with you. He's very talented.
Wow.
But I don't think he puts a team on his shoulders and does the things he does if he doesn't have 18 on the other side, taking some of that pressure off. And a perfect example to me is the semifinal game when Marvin went down and they needed Emeka to step up and do something, and he couldn't make those winning plays at the end. And when Marvin was down, now he put up, if you look at his numbers in the game, he put up 8, had over 100 yards, but when he didn't have Emeka when he didn't have Marvin on the other side of the field, because how many times have we heard Ohio State fans say, well, if Marvin doesn't get hurt, we win. And I think there's some truth to that, just like we said the year before about Jamison Williams in the title game. But the whole point is when Jamison Williams went down, you didn't have John Mechie either. Now you're asking like Slade Bolden and a bunch of dudes that never played before step up and win you that game. Ohio State just needed Emeka Egbuka to step up and win in that game, right? And I feel like if he was that dude, you'd think he would have made a play or two at the end of that game to win it, and he couldn't. And so it's a very good player in the top 10. If you want to say top 5, I'm not going to argue with you, but you can't have number 2 in my list. You can't have number 2.
I mean, I would be completely fine with Roma Dunze from Washington being number 2. I think that, when I look at that kid, I'm just like, that kid is 6'3", 215 plus. He could run for days. He's explosive. There's a lot.
Good route runner.
Him. Yeah, he is. But I just think that the reason that Emeka is so high is just, I think that this list is just not a great list. Overall, I
get that. I get that. But to me, there's enough kids that you can project and enough kids that have, even again with room, you've got him. Okay. Well, he's a product of a system and the Ohio State kids aren't. You're telling me the system doesn't benefit their numbers as well? Sure. Of course it does. And that's okay. But you can look at the talent and say, is this guy good or not? And to me, you look at the production, I feel like those kids at Ohio State are great players. They're top 10 players. But when I watch the Washington kids play, I'm like, they are too. They're outstanding players too. And so to me, I'm putting Rome in that conversation. And again, let's be honest, I like Michael Penix a lot, but he's not CJ Stroud.
Sure.
And so I'm going to have to go with room there. Now, I think the one thing that hurts him a little bit is the touchdown numbers, because Washington spreads the ball around a lot more than Ohio State did last year. You look at Ohio State last year, you had 4 guys that had over 200 yards of receiving, only 4. And that was Marvin, Emeka, Julian, and Cade Stover. And you only had 4 guys that had more than 13 catches. Only 4 players at Ohio State last year had more than 13 catches last year, which in the past, they spread the ball around a lot more in the past. They didn't last year. You look at Washington, Ryan, They had 9 guys, 9 different receivers caught at least 19 passes. 9. Ohio State had 4.
Yeah.
They had, let's see here, 8 guys go for at least 225 receiving yards last season. And so that hurt him a little bit too, in my opinion, is the fact that the numbers are, the ball spread around a lot more at Washington, which, so he's not going to put up, or at least last year, didn't put up those big numbers that the Ohio State kids put up. Because, I think that's something that could maybe make people look at him and say, hey, that's why you're not going to have a Mech had more touchdowns or whatever the case may be. But I think that the system actually hurt his production a little bit. And because it's just not we're going to throw to these 2 guys like some of the other systems. That's kind of what I think a little bit when I look at him. So
there's just some guys on this list. I'm just like, I feel like we're still kind of living off of Xavier Worthy's pre-2022 hype, right? Where it's like he had a really nice freshman year. You're like, man, he's going to have a dynamic sophomore year.
Yeah.
Just wasn't very good as a sophomore. I mean, to be completely honest about it, like he wasn't very good. Yes.
A lot of drops.
Could he get it back on track? It's very possible. He's a very talented football player. I mean, he's one of those kids that at 6'1", 160 something pounds, he only needs half a step to create a big play. Like he's that type of athlete. But if we're talking about 2022 season being in this conversation, he shouldn't be this high right now. He shouldn't be. I don't even know if maybe I put him at 10 because he still has upside. Like maybe, like
Ryan, if you were to tell me Xavier Worthy belongs in the top 10 on projection alone, I'd say, okay, I'm fine with that. If you wanted to not have him in the top 10, I'd say, I'd start talking about the projection. Hey, you know what? I mean, because in one breath, I can't say I think Quinn Ewers is really going to have a good year, and then number 2, not say that none of his receivers are going to benefit from it.
Sure.
Right? I mean, but to your point, looking at this list, number 4 on this list, no, I can't.
It's just too high right now.
To me, look, I know that he's talented and had that good freshman year, but I mean, if we're just going to go off of what guys have done, Malik Neighbors was a much better wide receiver than he was last year. The kid from LSU, much better receiver than he was last year. Jalen McMillan was a much better receiver than he was last year. And hey, here's the thing. We saw those 2 kids on the same field going against each other. And Jalen made plays, and guess what Malik did? Malik dropped a huge touchdown in that game, in a game that they you remember that play that they had that big pass down the field? Xavier Worthy. Yeah. What did I say, Malik? Yeah, Xavier Worthy had a chance for a big play down the middle of the field and just dropped it in a game they lost by a touchdown. So it's and you just, I can't go there with you on that one. So you can't tell me he's there and then you're going to have him behind. You're going to have him ahead of Jalen McMillan. I can't go there with you. I can't go there with you.
And I love the story of Ladd McConkey, right? Former walk-on, best receiver on Georgia this past year, 2 straight national championships. But he's not a top 10 receiver in college football. That's just kind of where it is, man. He's a good football player. There's no doubt. He made a lot of clutch plays last year when Georgia needed him. He's a good football player. But I mean, the production doesn't back up that point.
Nor does the talent. Nor does the talent. If we're going to be completely honest with you,
just a good football player. He's not a top 10. He's not a top 10 wide receiver in college football. He's just not.
No. I mean, no. I like you said, I get it. All right, but I mean, like you said, the production's not there. The talent's not there. I can't go there with you. I really can't. Now, the question would be, Ryan, is who should be on that list? Because I would argue that the kid from Western Kentucky shouldn't be on that list either, in my opinion. I mean, that's a system. That's everything that I see at Western Kentucky. I kind of look at it and say, hey, it's fun, it's numbers and production, but it's if you can't have a 4,000-yard passing quarterback in that system, he's not that good. Go compare, and this was my Austin Reed. Go look at his numbers, compare them to the kid that they had the year before. Bailey, what's his name? Zappy. They're not even close. I mean, he threw for 4,000. Yeah, Bailey Zappi threw for almost 6,000 yards, right? I mean, that's what a big-time quarterback in that system looks like. And I feel the same thing about the wide receiver position, Ryan. I can't go there with that kid. To me, I can't. Now the question is okay, well then who are you going to put in there, right? I think that's a more
I,
fair conversation to have.
I would have put one of the Kent State receivers that transferred out this past year, Dante Cephas, or I forget the Walker's kid's first name. I know it starts with a D, that transferred down to North Carolina. Devontae Walker, who transferred down to North Carolina. He should be potentially Drake May's number one option in 2023. So if we're talking about projection, I mean, he had like 1,000 yards last year. Plus, now you're with the second best quarterback in college football potentially. Right. I mean, I think he should have a big year. Dante Cephas going over to Penn State, I think is going to potentially be a nice player with Drew Aller. So I think one of those two deserves to have him.
And the other part of it too, Ryan, is those kids, we have seen those kids produce against good schools. I mean, we saw them perform last year against Washington, and I thought they performed very well. And I like Cephas more. I think Cephas's game to me projects a little bit more because he's such a good route runner. I mean, he is a really dynamic route runner. Walker's a very good player too. I mean, that kid had over 100 yards last year against Georgia. He had 106 yards and a touchdown. I mean, so it's not like they're out there dominating bad teams. And then Cephas had 105 yards against Washington. Georgia did a better job keeping him in check because he was more of a slot. But those are good football players that have produced against Division I football teams. And so I'm with you on those two guys. I'm totally fine having those two guys on there. I would say very, very comfortable having those two guys on there, especially the Walker kid going to North Carolina. Because if we're gonna put guys in here because of the system they play in, you got to give me a North Carolina kid in that offense.
He's gonna put up some numbers. He's gonna put up some numbers. Yeah.
Because Josh Downs is gone, right? Antoine Green is gone, isn't he? He's in the NFL now too, right?
Correct.
You're gonna have a really good tight end in Bryson Nesbitt, but after that, there's a spot there. JJ Jones is there. I mean, there's some young players, Andre Green Jr., but that kid's gonna step right into that and be a productive player for them. And I feel the same way about Dante Cephas at Penn State. I think he's gonna end up being Drew Aller's best friend by the middle of the season, in my opinion.
I think one other guy that I would mention, and this is a little bit of a tough one because he just entered the portal, but I think Keon Coleman that played at Michigan State last year was a stud, man. I really think he's talented. Yeah. I think we have to project with him because he only had around 800 yards, I think like 700 something yards last year, but that kid is very, very talented.
Yeah, talented. I just got to see the production, and I got to know where he's going to play first. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of hard for me to say, well, he's going to be good because I don't even know what system he's going to play in next year. So that makes it a little bit harder for me. And then there's some, the kid here's a kid that I have my eye on as a breakout potential top 10 guy is the Wells kid from South Carolina. I thought he had a really nice year coming up from because he was at James Madison the year before. Now James Madison is an FBS team now, but they were not when he was there.
Yep.
And so, he went out this past year at South Carolina and had 68 catches for 928 yards, 6 touchdowns, and he finished the season well. Now, he had a tough time against Notre Dame, but you know who else had a tough time putting up big numbers against Notre Dame? Just about every other receiver in college football last year. But he went for 177 against Tennessee, 131 against Clemson. So he finished the year very strong. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to have a really good year this year. He's someone that I would probably have in the bottom of my top 10. I think he's a good kid that I really like, Ryan. Looking forward.
Yeah.
Let's move on and get this last couple lists out here real quick, Ryan. Tight end, no brainer, number 1. Brock Bowers, number 1. Brevin Spann-Ford from Minnesota, number 2. I know you really like that one as well. I know you're very high on him. Jatavion Sanders, number 3. You've got Jaheim Belt, number 4. Bryson Nesbitt at number 5 from North Carolina. Benjamin Urasek from Stanford at number 6. Cade Stover from Ohio State, number 7. Jalen Conyers at Arizona State, number 8. Caden Priestcorn from Ole Miss is number 9. And then the Sidhu Traore kid that was at Colorado. Has he committed anywhere yet? Do we know?
I don't think so. I think he's in the portal right now.
Because where was he? Was he at Troy, or Arkansas State? Arkansas State the year before.
He was really good at Arkansas State. And expected. I mean, he was a big grab for Colorado in the transfer portal, but for whatever reason, I don't know what the situation is. He is back in the portal, so it's a very unknown situation right now.
Yeah. Brock Bowers, no brainer, number 1. Ryan, I told you this before. I mean, you've got to always be careful when you're doing these lists that if you watch a couple games and a guy doesn't flash, you shouldn't assume that that's who he is. Some guys just have down games. I watched Texas a few times last year. I didn't notice Jatavion Sanders really standing out. You've seen games where he looked really good, and the numbers at the end of the year are really good.
Yes.
And I think he is another guy that will benefit production-wise from what I expect to be a more consistent Brock Ewers. So, I'm good with him being there. Bryson Nesbitt, I like a lot. Jaheim Bell's way too high, in my opinion. I think that's sort of like this thing of, he runs the football, but he's just an okay player. Going to Florida State should help him a little bit. Benjamin Urisek's a guy I think is going to have a lot of production this year because of the system that he plays in.
I hope so.
Here's a guy that I think is going to have a big jump in production, right? I'm guessing that this is a reach. This could be a reach. I'm not going to lie, because it's just not a system that normally throws a ton of balls to the tight end. Even though it uses the tight end, but it's not from a clutch situation as opposed to a volume situation. But I think this year is going to be a lot more volume, and that's Cade Stover at Ohio State.
Yeah,
because of the fact that you don't have. I mean, you're going to have a lot of good young players, but you're going to have a new quarterback, and I think one of the best ways to get a good young quarterback comfortable, Ryan, and a first-time starter comfortable, is to really utilize the tight end out of the backfield, over the middle. I can see Cade Stover. I mean, he had 36 catches for 406 yards last year, 5 touchdowns. I know you've said NFL people are very high on him.
Yeah.
If he's healthy, if he's healthy, I could see Cade Stover seeing a really nice jump in production. Like I said, 36 catches last year. I could see him getting up to 45, 50 at least this year, and getting around 600 yards. And Ohio State hasn't had that kind of production from a tight end in a number of years. But I think it's a combination of, he can fill that middle of the field role that they didn't use enough of last year, and just the nature of having a first-time starter or quarterback is where I see that production taking a jump, in my opinion.
Well, I think the guy that's going to be way higher on this list is the guy that actually is right under him on this list. I like Jalen Conyers from Arizona State. He was a former Oklahoma player that transferred to Arizona State. Honestly, man, what?
Well, I'm so mean. He's going to have a quarterback that loves throwing to the tight end.
Sure.
So there's going to be that.
Hey, man. And I've heard that Jalen has had a great spring. Now going into the offseason, he had over 40 catches last year. He had over 400 yards. And what was an anemic offense for Arizona State last year with Emory Jones? It just was not very good. Yet he still had some production. He actually had a lot of production for the situation he was in. And I really think that that kid, if he puts together the season, I think his talent is worth it, because he's like 6'4", 265, but he can run and he can really work things after the catch. I think he could have 600 plus yards next year. And I think that he could be one of the best tight ends in all of college football. And I think he could also be a NFL draft riser. So I expect Jalen Conyers from Arizona State to have a big year. Benjamin Urisek's always been a guy, man. Like, I remember him against Notre Dame a couple years ago, where I was like, that kid moves different for a tight end, man. Really, he's talented.
Dude, didn't he have a jet sweep 2 years ago for a 50-yard touchdown? He ran.
That was last year.
That was last year. I thought it was the year before.
That was last year. Like a 50-yard gain or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, he's a good football player, man. He really is. He's a really good football player.
I like Benjamin Urisek. Again, you have to give him the football. But then bringing in that Sacramento State coaching staff, obviously with Troy Taylor, they had a Marshall Martin kid at Sac State the last couple of years that was one of their best pass catchers, and he was a tight end. He kind of played like that big slot position. So I think that we're going to see a big upside for him as a player in year 2. I love Brevin Spanford being quoted on this list, because not only was he productive in a anemic passing offense for Minnesota, he was also a really good blocker, man. So shout out to the blockers on this list. I mean, that kid's like 6'7", 265 pounds. He's a really good football player. Cool with Sanders being there. I agree. Jaheim Bell's a big projection, man. One, he was not an incredibly productive pass receiver last season. And 2, he's going to Florida State that hasn't really utilized the tight end that well over the last couple of years. Like they had the Cameron McDonald kid who was just like a afterthought. And I actually thought he was a decently talented player. It still didn't get a lot of opportunities. So we'll see with him, man. I just think as at this point, that's just way too high for a guy like Jaheim Bell. Certainly talented.
A guy that averaged 9.2 yards per catch last year at South Carolina. Here's a guy that's not on the list. If you say, okay, well, if you don't think that guy should be on there, who should be on there? I'll tell you a guy that should be on there. I can't believe he's not on this list. Is Aronde Gadsden II.
Do we count him as a tight end, though?
Yes,
He's
because
a
they
big
list him
slot.
as a tight end, and
I
the way they
know,
use him.
but
I mean, look, Michael Mayer wasn't attached all that much either, but they call him a tight end. They treat him like a tight end. They try to get him in slot tight end matchups. So yeah, he's a tight end in my opinion, and he should be on this list, right? Because that's the nature of college football now, man. I mean, Jaheim Bell's not lining up in an attached position 75,000 times a game. You know what I mean? Like that's the way they use them. They don't use an attached tight end a whole lot. And to me, that's a good football player. And we saw that firsthand, obviously,
he's a
ourselves.
really good football player. Yeah.
He's a good football player. And so I look, they list him as a tight end. I think he can
I should have included him in my wide receiver list since he's a wide receiver, Brian.
No,
but I like
a wide
him,
receiver.
I love
not a wide
Jackson.
receiver. He is a tight end. They list him as a tight end, and they use him over the middle of the field a bunch.
ESPN listed Jaden Thomas as a tight end as well. So,
right.
sometimes
and
listings
Jaden
are wrong.
Greathouse. Okay, but that's because they don't know the team. The team lists him as a tight end. And so I think they would know how they use him more than a lot of other people would. So now you're just trying to piss me off, and it's working.
Syracuse, give me a call. I'll label your roster better for you, man. Okay. I'll label the roster better.
Okay, moving on before I snap on Ryan right now. Interior offensive line, Ryan, I'm good with no Notre Dame guys not being on there. I'm comfortable with that. There's a couple positions where I have some big issues, but none of them being that, Zeke Correll had a nice year. He's got to be a little bit more consistently dominant for me to put him on this list, because this is guards and center. So this is a top 10 of 3 positions, not 2, like it is for offensive tackle. I'm good with him not being on that list, but I'll tell you a guy that I could see being on that list. Now, if we're going to do a centers only list, Zeke's in there for me. He's one of the 10 best returning centers in college football next year, in my opinion. I just don't know if I'm going to put him in the top 10 all interior offensive line. I just got to see a lot, just some more dominant play from him. But he definitely played good for them this year. Yeah. I'm very curious to see if we're talking about Billy Schrauth as being a potential guy on this list. No conversation right now about having him on this list. Guy's never played a snap of college football. Sure. But could we see him on this list when we're having the same conversation next year? I don't know. He's got the talent for it, but I'll say this: Notre Dame needs him to be that guy going into the season, because the guard position is the one where we're still going to see sort of the biggest question marks still about this offensive line. Is they're going to have to get good guard play. It doesn't have to be great guard play, but it has to at least be good guard play. And the other part of it is, Ryan, is you're gonna need you're going to really need him, especially to me. If you want to be a great offensive line, you're going to need at least one of those guards and the reason I say this, you need a dominant side. You need at least one dominant side. And if neither of the guards step up, then you're not going to have a dominant side. Right. And so that's why it's important that you say, hey, look, one of these guards has to really step up and be good, because you need a dominant side. And that's a big thing for me.
Yeah. And I mean, and this list is kind of thin a little bit, right? Like there's some guys you're just like, but you can't really argue too much against it, because it just seems like there's not a lot of great interior offensive linemen coming back in 2023. So I feel like one of those guys could definitely take that type of jump. I was happy to see that they didn't forget about Christian Mahogany, who was obviously lost preseason from Boston College, but I need to go back and actually find the article, but I'm sure that he was at least top 2 or 3 on the list going into the 2022 season.
Which is why I would have even had him a little bit higher. I mean, I don't think his injury was such that he's never going to be the same player again. I don't think it was that kind of injury. I'd be okay having him on the list. I think Zach Zinter's, I would say Zach Zinter probably needs to be higher than 3. Yeah. Just my opinion. I think he's about as steady of an offensive lineman as you're going to find in college football, in my opinion.
I have Cooper Beebe is a fantastic player, so I was okay with him there. I have never seen the Bo Limmer kid play from Arkansas. I've never focused on him, so I just don't know enough about him, to be honest, other than the PFF grades they put. I did also love, I'll say this, Christian Haynes from UConn is actually a really good player, man. I was happy they put him in the list. I didn't think that he would be, but he is there. Another USC offensive lineman.
4. Had him at number 4.
It's really high. Another USC offensive lineman that's slightly overrated, Justin Dedich. He's okay, man. He's fine.
Okay. This could just be me being a Notre Dame guy. But if I had to pick next year who I wanted on my team, him or Zeke Correll, I'm taking Zeke Correll. I'm not gonna lie.
Yes. Yes. Yep.
And I'd say the same thing with the next guy on the list, number 6, Drake Nugent. I do not get this one, and I don't understand. It's not just Pro Football Focus either. I
No.
mean, he was what was it, Walter Football or Walter Football? Walter
He probably was on Walter Football too.
the overall pick. Jack Kaiser in the first round. Why not?
Sure.
The Walter Camp preseason All-American list. He's first team All-American, and I'm just thinking, based on what? I didn't see it with him. He's another guy that I just didn't see. I didn't see what other people. I don't see what other people see with him. I don't.
I think he's a very solid football player who's playing at Michigan this year. So people are like, yeah, jump on that bandwagon early. Like, that's kind of what I feel like then.
Yeah.
A little bit of a projection here, but I also like number 7, the Tate Ratledge kid who plays offensive guard for Georgia. Yeah. That kid's talented, man. Yeah. He's massive, dude. So
he'll be top 5 in this list real quick. I mean, I would have him top 5. If we're talking about projecting even a little bit, Ryan,
yeah,
he's easily top 5. I mean, to me, I'm putting him ahead of Nugent and Diedrich right now.
I think there's a couple of young Georgia offensive linemen because we didn't talk about him in the offensive tackle list, but I would be surprised if Amarius Mims has his head on straight this year. I'd be surprised if he's not a top 10 offensive lineman in college football after the season as an offensive tackle for Georgia. He's a talented kid, and so is Ratledge. He's a massive mover, man. Like I would not mess with that guy in a dark alley. I'll just put it that way. Would not mess with him.
That's good to know. All right, let's get to a little bit more. By the way, we're going to go back to this conversation.
Yeah.
How many receivers do you know line up attached to the line of scrimmage for 82 snaps, which is what Aronde Gatz did last year, 501 in the slot. So, yeah. So just another example of you are making me mad today.
That's what you've been doing over there, man.
I found that real quickly. Hey, here's a guy that I haven't seen, Ryan, that I wanted to ask you about because I see a lot of him being one of the top 2 or 3 centers in college football. I have not seen this kid. What are your thoughts on Zach Frazier from West Virginia?
Haven't seen him at all. So I don't have much. Do you know, I just noticed, was Cedric Van Pran on that list from Georgia? He should have been on that list too. He's one of the better centers in college football.
I think Donovan Jackson is getting way too much hype as a first round draft pick next year. But if we're talking about projecting best interior offensive lineman this year, he needs to be higher than 9. He absolutely needs to be higher than Drake Nugent. He absolutely needs to be higher than Justin Diedrich for sure.
Yes,
for sure. So he's another guy that I would have higher on this list as well, Ryan. And again,
he might be the most talented guy on this list, honestly.
He's in the conversation. I mean, and his good snaps are he is their version of Blake Fisher, but I think he was even a little bit more dominant at times than Blake because he wasn't playing on an island. It's just one of the benefits of playing guard over tackle. But we talk a lot about Blake Fisher being a guy that his good snaps are as good as just about anybody. Donovan Jackson's 20 best good snaps last year are better than just about any guard on this list if you take their 20 best snaps. The consistency is, and that's going to come from him being he was a young football player still last year.
Yep.
All the experience he got last year is going to be huge for him. If you're talking about projection and you wanted to have him as a top 5 interior guy, I would not argue with you on that one. I would. Yeah. Now, here's my only concern for Donovan as a player. This isn't about his talent. There's a lot of question marks about what's going to be on both sides of him. I think Carson Hinsman should take the center job. So, but he's going to be a first-year starter. Kid I like a lot. You and I liked a lot. I still thought Notre Dame should have taken him, to be completely honest with you, in the 2022 class. But the left tackle thing is a mess. The guy that he played with all spring is probably not going to be the starter at left tackle. They just went out and got the kid from San Diego State who's okay.
I guess they move Fryer probably over to right tackle.
Yeah, probably. So that'd be my only concern for him. And we've seen that at Notre Dame where we've seen guards struggle because of what around them wasn't as good. And that's my only concern for Donovan Jackson. But if we're just talking talent and potential, as long as what's around him is not dragging him down, and I don't think it's going to be that bad.
Yeah,
he's a guy to me that should be a top 5 guy for me. And again, because a little bit overrated with I've seen people put him in the top 15 of next year's offensive draft. I'm like, all right, let's pump the brakes a little bit. That's projecting a little bit too much.
Yeah,
but if we're talking just interior players, to me, he's one of the 5 to 7 best interior players. And especially if we're going to go off of this list, and should he be ahead of the guys on this list? There's no doubt he should be ahead of Diedrich and Nugent on this list.
Yes,
easily,
yes.
easily, in my opinion. And then the last guy on the list, Ryan, Christian Mahogany is another one that even with the injuries, I'd put him higher, even with the injury. I mean, I get he didn't play last year, and I was glad that they put him on the list. But I mean, he's if he doesn't have the injury last year, he's first of all,
probably in the draft.
Yeah, exactly. He's
Yeah.
probably not even coming back, but he's a really good football player. Now,
Yes.
with him, it's going to be the same thing, though. Here's my only question about him is the same thing. What's around him? It's not very good.
Yeah.
And that's the only issue that I have with Mahogany. But as an individual player, I mean, he should be higher on this list, and even with the injury, because the injury is why he should be 5, 6, or 7. I mean, if it wasn't for the injury and he decided to come back, he's top. I mean, him and the kid from Kansas State, to me, that's the top 2, in my opinion. Would you disagree with the pushback on that?
No, not if I mean, if he had played this past year, I don't think so. Like, I mean, that's just he was. And again, you never know exactly what it would have looked like because, to your point, I mean, it's like Drew Kendall. Does he take a big step in year 2 as the full-time center? And I guess the conversation is how much of Christian Mahogany's production in 2021 is because everything around him was so solid, right? Like you had a solid center, you had solid tackles. Solid. I get that, but I think that he, to your points, and I think it's a great point, is that he would not even be on this list if he didn't get hurt because he would be in the NFL right now. He probably would have been a top 3 round pick.
Right.
Like that's.
I was simply saying, let's just say for whatever reason he decided to come back. Right. Yeah. If he was healthy, he's in the conversation for top 2, in my opinion. So I definitely would have him. I mean, I'd say find that happy medium. And I don't believe his injury was such that it was, what was it? It was an Achilles or an ACL. Okay.
It was ACL. Yeah.
That's fine. I mean, he'll come back from that.
And it was in the preseason.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was in the preseason. Exactly. Playing basketball too, which is a very unfortunate circumstance.
No,
but yeah.
That sucks.
Yeah.
That really sucks.
Yeah.
Ryan, let's move on to recruiting.
Yep.
And so we're getting to this point of the year where Notre Dame is going to start having some kids on campus here in May for unofficials. And then we're now less than a month away from the official visit season coming in. And I think Notre Dame is really in a good position right now to say, hey, you've got a really strong foundation of a class. You've got an excellent offensive class. Obviously, 5-star CJ Carr, big-time receiver. Receiving class is loaded. I mean, it's pretty much full now. Now it's like, do you want to take another or not? You've got a top 250 caliber tight end. O-line class has a really good interior guy in Peter Jones, in my opinion. Anthony Knapp, we'll see. I know the coach loves him. Good top 250 caliber running back. Defensive class is starting to come along, right? Pretty good corner class so far. Defensive line class. You wrote an article today at irishbreakdown.com about how the defensive line class is emerging, or is getting some momentum. Obviously, you got Cole Mullins, who I'm very high on. He's my number 1 ranked player in the defensive class. Owen Wafel's my number 2 ranked player in the defensive class. Both ranked as top 150 guys for me. I know you're also very high on Owen Wafel. Bryce Young, tons of upside, raw, but tons of upside. And then, of course, you've kind of kicked off your safety class with a good, solid player in Kennedy Urlacher. So you're in a position where it's not an elite class right now, at least because the defense isn't on that level yet. Offense is trending in that direction. You just got how it's going to close. So they're in a position, Ryan, where it's okay. If you can build on this foundation, you've got a chance to have a gap-closing class. But they're also in a position, Ryan, right now where I'd say they're not in a strong enough position where I'm going to guarantee that kind of finish. They're also in a position where they could fade on a couple guys and then finish in a class that either A is a lot like, a couple years ago, right? Like last year's class was balanced. It was great. It was a top 5 class to me. Yeah. 2 years ago was a very one side of the ball dominant class, right? The defensive side of the ball was really good, but even there you had a miss at safety, right? Offensive class came up really short numbers, but you had some impact talent. Jadarian Price I graded as a top 100 player. Tobias Merriweather I graded as a top 50 player. He had a pretty good offensive line class. So there was some, even then there was some good players. This class, if they don't finish strong, has a chance to look a lot like that class, where there's some really good football players, but you missed here, you missed there, you short on numbers here, you short on impact players there. It's going to be all about how they finish. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have a conversation today. We're going to talk about 5 guys with an asterisk, and we'll get to that at the end. Ryan doesn't even know what my asterisk is going to be. 5 guys that we look at and say, if Notre Dame is going to have a truly gap closing class, they have to finish with these 5 guys. And you and I are on the same page position wise, but we maybe don't necessarily have the same individual player. But if Notre Dame is going to finish with a gap closing class, it has to look like this.
Right.
And I think we're going to start on the offensive side of the ball, Ryan, because it's about with the offensive side, it's about putting the finishing touches on what's already a big time class.
Yep.
And that makes this pick very easy. The player on offense that is the one guy, if I had to say there's one guy on offense that above all others that you have to get if you're going to have a gap closing class, Ryan, it's an easy one.
Yeah, it's Gerby Lambert out of Catholic Memorial out there in Massachusetts. Same high school, obviously, as Boubacar Traore that Notre Dame landed in the 2023 class. That's it, man. I mean, this is just a situation, Brian, where I remember we were messaging about this earlier as far as like who, would be my potential top 5. This is the only offensive side. This is the only offensive player I included in general because I think that you have a lot more clarity on the offensive side of the football. Like you said, you have a running back commit in Aeneas Williams. You're going to take a second, or you're going to push for a second running back in this class, but you already have that number. You already have a player. You have CJ Carr in this class. You have a 3 wide receiver class. You have Jack Larson. You have 2 offensive linemen, but I have some serious questions on if either Peter Jones or Anthony Knapp are true offensive tackles at the next level. So that is the biggest need in this class is you need to find not only an offensive tackle, but you need to find a guy that I think projects to left tackle on the college level, and that's Gerby Lamberts. I mean, you have other really good players on the board offensive tackle, like Grant Bricks, for instance, who I think is a really good football player, but he's more of a right tackle type. Styles Prescott maybe could be a left tackle, but I think Gerby Lambert is the easiest projection to being a blindside protector of who's on the board for Notre Dame. I think it's a little bit of a down year as far as offensive tackles in the 2024 class just in general, but Gerby's one of those guys that I look at and I say, that kid with the right development and the right coaching could be a stud, right? He has that type of upside. So I think that Gerby not only is a position of need, it's a position that you have needed more of just in general over the last couple classes. And I think he's the best bet to be in the left tackle, potentially in the class for Notre Dame if he lands. And obviously he's going to be on an official early on in June, which will be big for that recruitment. A kid that hasn't been traveling too much just in general this spring. But I think Notre Dame has a chance to really push for a guy like a Gerby Lambert, who they've liked for a long time now. And I think he's the clearest left tackle on the board for Notre Dame.
And he's a high upside guy, long, athletic. He has all the tools that you want in an offensive lineman. And in a year where you're not right now, you don't have a toolsy offensive lineman in the board class right now, which factors into it as well. I like Peter Jones a lot, but Peter Jones is a Tommy Kramer type, like a physical, fundamentally sound type of guy that hopefully can stay healthier than Tommy did. But he's that kind of guy more so than an Aaron Banks with a super high ceiling where if the light ever goes on, that guy's going to be a star kind of guy.
Yeah.
And so you need that. I mean, this is Notre Dame. You need that. Last year's offensive line class, Ryan, had a lot of high floor guys, but they at least had that one super high ceiling guy in Charles Jagasaw. Even, and we've seen that in other years as well. And like 2021 class or the 2022 class was similar to that, right? I mean, you didn't have that surefire star player, but we've talked about this before. Emil Wagner has that upside. He has that potential. Now he's much bigger gap between his floor and his ceiling, but at least you had Billy Shroud was another guy with a very high ceiling. Wasn't the 5-star recruit that Jagasaw was, but definitely had that kind of potential and upside. So you're going to need those kind of guys in every class. And this year's class, if you don't get Gerby Lambert, I don't know who that guy's going to be on this offensive line class. Maybe Grant Bricks, but again, can Grant Bricks play left tackle? I don't know the answer to that question right now because we haven't seen him really pass block. So I can't do it. He's very athletic. He's very physical, but does he have and even if you argued, Ryan, hey, I think he's got the athleticism, then my question would be, does he have the disposition to be a left tackle? Because that's a kid that wants to knock your head off.
Yeah, you have to be a little bit more controlled and that type of thing at left tackle. I agree. Yeah. I think Grant Bricks could play right tackle at the next level. But to your point, I'm not sure he's a left tackle.
Right. So maybe he turns into one, but that's a big risk. So I think in Styles Prescott I like, but Styles Prescott is not a guy that I look at and I like him, but he's not a guy that I look at and say, boy, this guy's going to continue the left tackle tradition that Notre Dame has going on right now. He's just not 100%. That kind of prospect to me.
Agree.
So it's an easy one. I'm going to circle back to the offense at the end, Ryan,
Yeah.
because I'm going to have my asterisk is going to be an offensive guy. But a lot
Okay.
of this focus, Ryan, is on defense.
Yes.
Because right now the defensive class, I mean, offense, you're done at wide receiver. You can be done if you want to at tight end. You're done at quarterback. They're not done anywhere on defense except maybe corner as far as the needs. I would argue that they're done at corner from a need standpoint. They still want Caleb Beasley,
A third one.
right?
Yeah. Yep.
But needs wise, you're set. You don't have a single linebacker in the class. You're not full on either inside or outside on the defensive line. You've only got one safety in the class. You need three, minimum three.
Yep. Yep.
So there's a lot more needs here, Ryan. And so this is the side of the ball that ultimately, big picture wise, like if you come short on the offensive line, it's disappointing, but it's also a bad year offensive line and you can make excuses for it. And the rest of the offensive class is still really good. If you come up short on if you get some of these misses on the defensive side of the ball, you're talking about this class just isn't good enough. And that's kind of where they are right now if they don't close. Yep. And when we talk about the biggest must get on defense and the area, the guy that they have to go to, Ryan, it's right down the street from me. And it's a no-brainer.
About an hour and a half away, man.
That's
Mr.
right.
Justin Scott, St. Ignatius, obviously a prestigious Catholic institution in the city of Chicago. We talk about this all the time, obviously mostly joking, but being also very serious about this, is that he is a 5-star defensive tackle, an hour and a half away, a young man that wanted a Notre Dame offer for a long time. Now he has become a priority for Notre Dame. Unfortunately, there are other schools that are involved. You talked about him taking a trip down to Miami. You talk about schools like Michigan, obviously still pushing hard for him. Even USC was a team that has been pushing hard for him. This is one, Brian, where we've talked about this, man. I don't want to have to rehash it as much, but it's inexcusable not to get Justin Scott in the class if you're Notre Dame. You have to land this type of player. One, because he's right in your backyard. Two, he's a 5-star level talent, not just the 5-star on the rankings, right? Like a 5-star level talent. That ranking is legitimate, in my opinion. And number three is that you are in a position, if you're Notre Dame, where you need to continue adding playmaking size on the interior for the defensive line. You need that. And this is a situation where Justin Scott is a clear no-brainer in this class. You have to get him. You have to get him. If you can't, then it is a massive miss for this defensive line class, massive miss for the coaching staff for Notre Dame. You have to get Justin Scott in this class.
And Ryan, we just talked about the offensive side of the ball. If you miss out on Gearby Lambert and you go out and get Styles Prescott and Grant Bricks, you're like, you know what? That's a miss, but you got two good football players. If they don't get him, who's the next guy? The only other interior guy on the board right now is Sean Civiliano, and I'm sorry, I don't see it with him. I mean, that's a big drop off.
Yes.
So it puts even more pressure on them to land him. And look, if you can't land a big time defensive tackle from Chicago who goes to a very good private school, then you've got to really rethink what you're doing here when it comes to who you have recruiting the defensive line for you. This is huge for Al Washington. Get this one done, and it takes a lot of the pressure off of him.
Yep.
Miss on this one, and we have to have a very serious heart-to-heart conversation about who's coaching your defensive line moving forward. That's how important it is to me. But we're not done on the defensive line, Ryan. Look, I like what they've done so far. I'm very high on Cole Mullins. Bryce Young is a very low floor, high ceiling guy with a lot of tools. You mentioned in your article today, Ryan, it's not out of the question. And this could be their saving grace. It's not, if they do miss on Justin Scott, it's not out of the question that Bryce Young's not going to keep growing a lot and eventually end up inside. And now he's your second interior player in this class.
It's possible.
But if that's going to happen, then you're going to need to really finish strong on defense at the defensive end position. But right now, we project him as a field end. He's a 3.5-star kid on my board, 4.5-star upside, not quite 5-star upside yet, but I expect him to be by the time his senior season's over with. Cole Mullins is a guy I'm very high on. It's a good start, but that's not a gap closing class, in my opinion, because I like Cole Mullins more than most. I have him as a top 150 guy, but you're not gap closing on people if your best guy's a 150 guy. You're just not.
Right.
And so Viper's another position, Ryan. Now, here's the good news. They've got 3 really, really good football players on the board. right now. But Viper is another position where they have to really hit a home run, in my opinion.
Yeah, and fortunately for Notre Dame, two of the kids that we're going to talk about are going to be visiting in June. We already talked about Elijah Rushing out of South Point Catholic in Tucson, Arizona. He will be here for the 9th through 11th weekend. I know that Malachi Williams will also be making a visit during that month. That date is still not completely cemented, but it is in the works. So that is a conversation piece that we'll be having in the future. And then Logan Thomas is a kid that was on campus just this past month, a guy that Notre Dame feels like they're in very good position with. We feel like they are
2 visits set up over the next month, right?
Yeah,
He'll be here
so
at one
far.
point in May, and then also coming back, was it the second weekend of June?
I think it was the 9th through the 11th, I believe.
I think so, yeah. I think
Yeah,
he's supposed to be back that second weekend.
And the great thing about these three players, Brian, is they all have one thing very much in common. They're all incredibly long and athletic. They have those things that are in common, man. I mean, look, at this point, we're talking about Elijah Rushing as potentially elite recruits for whoever lands him in 2024. 6'5 plus, 240 pounds, explosive, athletic. A lot of not quite as good as Keon was in 2023, but he has similar qualities that made Keon Keeley such a talented football player.
He's not quite as explosive as Keon was.
Yeah.
But he's very fluid, very nuanced. He knows how to. Yes, that's a good. Very good observation there, Ryan. I think Elijah's a 5-star. Have him graded as a 5-star. I have Elijah in that sort of 15 to 25 national range, where Keon was number 1, like overall.
Just a slight difference, yeah.
Right. I mean, it's different, right? But it's kind of like. But he's still a big-time needle mover for Notre Dame and a heck of a football player. And I'll say this, too. I do like the fact that I believe Elijah Rushing with his frame has some positional flexibility. It's not a given he's going to have to stay at Viper his whole career. And to the point of – and what that means is if you get him and Cole Mullins in the class, I think you could also justify that you should still take another of Malachi or Logan because they're more pure Vipers. In my opinion, especially Logan Thomas. Logan Thomas is the most pure Viper on the board right now because he can drop into coverage. He can he can take a wheel route. I mean, he fits you'll see him playing off ball, Ryan, and just like blitzing from different positions. He doesn't play off ball like he's, read and react flow and run the football, but he'll play off ball and move around as a blitzer and blitz from different places and play in space and things like that is what I'm referring to. He's the most pure Viper they have. So to me, that's the thing I like is, and even Malachi, Ryan, it would not shock me if he someday is big enough to be able to play field end. The point being, to me, you need to get one of them. It's a must get that you get one of them. But if you really want to close, and it's Rushing, and then Malachi, Logan are kind of in that, I think Logan to me says higher floor. Malachi has arguably the highest ceiling of any defensive lineman we've talked about, including Justin Scott on this list. But to me, if you're Notre Dame, you got to shoot for 2 of them. And they are. They're trying to get 2 of those 3 guys right now is their goal. They're not, even if Elijah Rushing called and committed tomorrow, my understanding is they'd still recruit the other 2 in hopes of getting one more. And Elijah Rushing is the kid that has there. I mean, this is a no-brainer, Ryan. I don't care who you sign. You keep recruiting Elijah Rushing, right?
You got a spot built in.
You figure it out. You figure it out. Yeah. So, you really want to close the gap, Ryan? You got to get 2. You get 2 of them. Now, to me, to meet your needs, 1. And if they get Justin Scott in one of those DNs, and let's say it's Logan Thomas or Malachi Williams, the guys that are lower ranked, that's a heck of a D-line class. That is a gap closing class. There's no doubt about it.
Especially if you can develop them.
Exactly. You really want to take that leap. So, but here's the thing: do you want to close the gap by this much, Ryan, or do you want to close the gap by this much? Right? Do that. To do that, get 2 of them. And I don't care which 2 it is. I really don't. Now, I like Elijah Rushing because I love the reason he's my top Viper on the board, Ryan, and arguably my best defensive lineman on the board, although Justin Scott's the most important. Justin Scott's obviously plays a different position, but the floor right now is higher for Elijah Rushing than it is for even for Justin Scott, in my opinion. Yeah. And that's what makes him such a big-time prospect is he is a guy that I think you can come in and expect within his first year or 2 at the latest that he's going to be able to be in your rotation. I mean, and I look at him as he's a rotation guy as a freshman. Rotation is up big time as a sophomore. By junior, he's your dude, right? I mean, at the very latest. And to me, that's the thing I like about Elijah is that combination of ceiling. The ceiling is there. right? But the floor is there too. And Notre Dame has not gotten a lot of high floor guys in recent years. The thing I like about what they've done so far is I think they have a couple guys with pretty high floors as well. I think Cole Mullins has a pretty high floor, especially when you consider he's just a junior. And I think Owen Wafel has a very high floor, in my opinion.
Agree.
So if you can get a third, and last year's class was all ceiling. I mean, all ceiling, right?
Yep.
And if you can get 3 guys that have that kind of floor, in my opinion, I think Justin Scott has a very high floor just because of his talent alone. He doesn't have to have great technique as a freshman. He's 6'5", 310 pounds, and he's athletic. You know, you can get by on certain things. That's also factors into the floor. Now, all of a sudden, that's how you balance a really high floor class with high ceilings with last year and the year before, because the last 2 years, Ryan, have been incredibly low floor, high ceiling classes. Tyson Ford, they didn't go Byron. Now you look at Joshua Burnham as being part of that class, Junior Talamaka. Not a lot of high floor guys in that class. Incredible ceilings. Last year's class, incredible ceilings. This year's class, if you get the players we talked about, we're on par with past classes from ceiling standpoint. But the biggest difference is there's a lot higher floors in this class, and that is really important. That's the biggest difference between what Georgia does and what Notre Dame is doing. Notre Dame is recruiting guys that if they all pan out, they're going to have an elite top 5 defensive line. But because there's so many low floor, high ceiling guys, your odds of most of those guys panning out are not nearly as good as what you see at Georgia, where they're ceiling and floor guys. And that's why you feel better about where Georgia is, significantly better about where Georgia is compared to Notre Dame, because it's that floor plus ceiling. Boubacar could end up being as good as anybody Georgia has in their roster right now. But he could also never start a game at Notre Dame. That's the difference. Armel Mukam, Ryan, you think could be as good as any of those guys. I know you think he's your number one.
He looks like an SEC defensive lineman. He does, 100%.
Right.
Yeah.
But he's not there right now, and he's
100%.
got a ways to go. And that's the difference, right? And that's where I love about the idea of a Rushing, a Scott, a Cole Mullins, a Owen Wafel, all being in the same class, is you're talking about really high floors as well. Does that mean I'm turning down Malachi Williams? Heck no. Right. Same with Logan Thomas. It's just that's what makes Rushing so different to me, is I feel like there's a much higher floor along with him. Same with Justin Scott, and same with Owen Wafel, same with Cole Mullins. And so that's what excites me about the potential. Now, are they going to be able to do that? That's a big question.
Right.
Got a lot of closing to do with Justin Scott. You have a lot of closing to do with Malachi Williams. The guy that I feel that right now they're in the best shape in right now is Logan Thomas, easily. Like, I think Notre Dame's a team to beat for him right now. Our sources at Notre Dame and around the Notre Dame program still feel good about where Justin Scott is. We'll see, how that goes. We'll have a better idea this June. If he doesn't get back on campus in the first 2 to 3 weekends of June, then, I don't care what you tell me, right? He may not use an official visit to Notre Dame. Well, if he doesn't get back on campus in June, then he's just giving lip service to Notre Dame. That's the way I look at it. You've got to get him back on campus. If you don't, I don't see how that one works in your advantage. But I'll say the guy that I'm feeling a lot better about now than I did 3 weeks ago, there's still a lot of work to be done, is Elijah Rushing. I mean, I'm hearing from both sides, I'm hearing a lot more movement in regard to Notre Dame is in a much better shot. Now, are they the leader that I think some people project them to be? I don't think that's accurate. Yeah. But Notre Dame is back in the game with Elijah Rushing. And to where you're actually at a point now, Ryan, if you can really crush that visit or knock that visit out of the park, and it's a very appropriate usage right now. If you can just hit that grand slam with him in this visit, now you could come out of this sucker and win it in the end. Whereas a month ago, I'd have said that's nonsense. There's no way they're going to be able to get that kid in the class. They got a puncher's chance now, Ryan.
Because, I mean, you haven't had that kid on campus in over a year at this point, right? And Elijah Rushing. Like, that's the situation you're in. I mean, that's why they felt like there was stagnation for a long time. I think the other key point, too, though, Brian, is that you already talked about the 2023 class was very low floor, high ceiling. So you need a little bit more of the high floor combination with this class. You also didn't get a true Viper in the 2023 class, and that's the 3 players you just talked about. Rushing, although can be probably a field end at some point, is a Viper early on in his career. Malachi Williams is all of 6'5", 228 pounds with very long arms, Logan Thomas was a guy that you saw listed between 6'3" and 6'4", but then we saw videos of him and we're like, oh, he may have had a little bit of growth spurt. He
Dude's
looks a little bit
long,
longer than I
man. Good
thought.
Lord,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. So all three of those players, I think you look at and say they are a necessity in this class, getting at least two of them, potentially, hopefully, because they are guys that meet a position need that you just weren't able to get in 2023. That was one of the big misses last year, was that you didn't get a true Viper. You got some really talented players, really good four-man class as far as upside is concerned, but you didn't get a guy that's a true Viper in that class.
Stay on defense, Ryan, and this is an interesting one for me. So obviously Notre Dame doesn't have a linebacker in this class, but you have a linebacker as one of your muskets for Notre Dame gap closing class. Let's just dive into it. I'll let you kick it off, Ryan.
Yeah, I think when you look at the Notre Dame roster that it's currently constructed, I think you have a lot of really talented linebackers, but obviously Prince Kali leaves, there's a little bit of a numbers thing now, right? You want to kind of really be able to bring in a couple guys in the 2023 class or 2024 class, that can meet the numbers for one. And I also think, Brian, like the one position that I think Notre Dame needs more of in this class is a true Mike at the next level. I think you're seeing Drake Bowen. Looks like he could potentially be that guy long-term. But after the season, possibility that JD Bertrand is no longer there. So you're really going to need to replenish the talents at linebacker in general at the Mike position. And honestly, right now with how the linebacker recruiting is in 2024, where there's just so many question marks, a lot more questions than answers, the guy that has the easiest answer for me on the board is Kingston Villamoasa out of Bellflower, California, St. John Bosco. I believe that Kingston is one of the absolute best linebackers in the 2024 class in a year that I would say is not the greatest linebacker year of all time. A highly religious young man playing at one of the best programs in all of high school football, brings a 6'3", 230-pound frame to the table immediately, has upside, he has name recognition, he has the rankings. He really has everything you want. High character, academic kid, religious, comes from a great program, knows what winning looks like. I think that he's a must-get for me just because linebacker is such a question mark in 2024, and I just think he's a really good football player and one of the surest things on the linebacker board in 2024.
I don't disagree with anything you just said about Kingston. I think he's a very, very especially when you look at it from a recruiting ranking standpoint, because he is a top 100 guy, it adds value to it. The only thing I would say, I'd make two comments, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on it, Ryan. Number one is I would put Chris Cole on this list sort of as an Kingston or. And if we're going to talk about what would be a gap closing class period, it's got to have those two guys in it, in my opinion. They're a step above because Kingston is the better player right now. Chris Cole has the highest ceiling of anybody on their board right now.
Agree.
And the reason I would say him too is because I do think this is a year where, for two reasons, and a lot of what you just said, you did sign two pretty darn good linebacker classes in a row.
You did.
And there's not a guy on that list that right now Notre Dame is like, gee, I don't know if that guy's going to be is as good as we thought. I mean, right now their thought is we hit on both of them. And you've even been able to move some of those linebackers to other positions to help you out, right? And what we saw from the three freshmen was pretty good. I think also because Notre Dame is moving to an offense where you're going to see them playing a lot more nickel. There's not that need for a third linebacker that's going to play 70 snaps a game like there was in the past. So the numbers are there, but I'm more willing and okay taking high ceiling guys in this class, and this is why. Take a guy like Teddy Rizak, for example. He's not a must-get. I'm just making it a point here. There have been other years where I probably would have had a little bit more problem taking him because the numbers were such, and the previous year's linebacker recruiting was such that you couldn't afford to miss at linebacker. You had to get a kid that you thought could play. You had to err on the side of the floor. I don't think they need to do that in this class for two reasons. One is because of what you've done, and number two, the other point you said, Ryan, this is not a very good linebacker class nationally. It's really not.
No.
And so I'm okay taking flyers on a Chris Cole type of kid. Now, I think Chris Cole's ranking is absurd. Like, to me, he's a top 150 kid. So it's not like, he's some kid that you never heard of that you're hoping can pan out. That's more what Teddy Rizak is. Never heard of him. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, he's got some tools. Let's see if he can pan out. I'm okay taking him in this year's class. Same with Chris Cole. I would argue that you take a guy like Chris Cole because the upside is such that, boy, this guy could end up being a really good player. And then, of course, with Kingston, it is that floor. And I also think Kingston brings a different style of play that you didn't have in any of last year's linebackers. So I do like that complementary nature that he brings to the table a little bit as well as the two inside guys. So those two guys, to me, you get either one of those, I can say, okay, I can live with this linebacker class. It's not going to be great, but I can live with it because at least you got one potential difference maker. If you want to get a gap closing, there you go. If you want to get a gap closing class, you need both of them, in my opinion. And right now, I think they have a better shot with Kingston than they do with Chris Cole. But I think they're in the game for both of them. I do
agree.
So
we have a lot more of a comprehensive understanding of where Kingston lies in this recruiting process, right? Because the one thing is Chris Cole is a little bit of a late bloomer to the recruiting process. You know, over the last few months, you're seeing the Georgias, the Tennessees, the Penn States, the Notre Dames, like all those teams really start to push for him. For Kingston, I mean, he's been getting offers since he was a freshman in high school, right? Like this has been a long process for him. And you already know that his top three is Notre Dame, Ohio State, and USC. And I would say that Notre Dame, Ohio State have kind of separated themselves in that top three, in my opinion. I think this is a clear Notre Dame, Ohio State battle. It honestly could go either way right now. I think Notre Dame's in a good spot. I think Ohio State's in a good spot. I think that these final visits are going to be massive to determining this one. I really think it is. So I think there's just a lot more clarity because we've known about Kingston for a lot longer. And he hasn't been a guy that's just recently blown up on the recruiting trail. Like, again, Kingston was getting offers since he was a freshman in high school.
Right.
Not a new situation for him. Chris Cole, it's a little bit of a different oddity, I guess is a good way to put it.
He's a very mature kid. I've learned, Ryan, Kingston, talking about Kingston. Oh, and yes, I think that makes him he would make him a really good fit at Notre Dame. They just got to close. That's going to be the key. Can they close on him? And they're out to see him today. Obviously, they got multiple coaches out to his high school anyway, out to see his high school today. So they're going to have to close. It's not going to be – look, I think right now Notre Dame's a leader, but it's like by this much over Ohio State, this much. And the visits are going to be the deal. You got to close. You got to be able to close. And then last but not least, Ryan, I mean, and this is one where honestly, there's not just one guy on it. I mean, because, you know, but we'll go with it. And obviously you need to get at least one potential impact safety. I don't know if there's a high floor, high ceiling combo guy on the board right now. I don't. I think all the guys are high ceiling guys. That's where you are. It is what it is. But the discouraging thing for me is the margin for error for them at safety is small because you can afford to take some shots at linebacker. And if you miss, it is what it is because you've done so well in past years. You can't afford that at safety. That's probably the position I'm the most concerned about right now of all positions at Notre Dame from a recruiting standpoint. Because if they miss it on offensive line, it's like, yeah, but the last couple were good. It wasn't a really good year nationally, and they're loaded for prospects that they're in on for next year. At safety, Ryan, it's just a mess. It's just a mess all around. And right now, even the guys that I think Notre Dame is in a good place for, I'm not willing to say right now for sure they're going to get those guys. Right. So, but I mean, getting a safety or two is really where I mean, it's problematic, but you've got to get one. So if you're going to talk about having a class that, forget the recruiting ranking standpoint, just that you and I always say it's about balance. It's about finding, spreading it around, make sure you're getting impact players all over. This is the position right now I'm probably most concerned about. Them getting their guys. So let's talk about that position, Ryan, and who would be the must get or two guy that you're going to look at there.
Well, I think it's a couple of the longer guys on the board for me right now. I think that when you look at it, the guy that you have felt like you're in a solid spot for the longest probably is Davis Andrews, obviously the safety out of Union Fork, Utah, who is American Fork, Utah. And he is a 6'2", 190-pound safety who you look at and say that kid could potentially do a couple different things for you, right? Like he could play a little bit from depth. He could come down, rotate down. He might even be a rover long-term. You never know with how his body might develop. He's been a guy that Notre Dame is in a pretty good spot with for a long time. But the issue is, Brian, is that I kind of thought this one would be wrapped up by this time, right? Like now he's talking about, and I put an update on yesterday, and there's an article at irishbreakdown.com that he has set an official to Notre Dame next month, but he also has officials to Utah and UCLA so far. And I'm sure there will be one or two added to that list at some point. So Davis Andrews is a big player on the board. Dewan Lane, again, like this is one where Notre Dame has gotten some momentum there, but it's going to be one of those ones where you have to battle to the absolute end if you have a realistic chance with a guy like Dewan Lane. But if you were able to get one or both of those guys out with Kenny Urlacher, I would feel a lot better about this class.
Yeah.
I'd be like, okay, now we're cooking with grease a little bit, right? So I really think that just getting at least one impact safety in this class is paramount. I think those guys are the closest things to impact safeties. If you get one of those at least, then I think you could say, now we're going to really, really focus on the Paul Menkes of the world, who I think is a good football player. I like Paul Menke a lot, actually. Oliver Miles is a toolsy developmental guy that maybe he's the third safety in this class. But regardless, though, I think that it would not be, it's definitely not a gap closing class. There's no doubt. So let's say there's a situation where you have Kennedy Urlacher, Paul Menke, and Oliver Miles as your top three, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say that happens. That's a big miss, right? I think Davis Andrews or Dewan Lane need to be in this class for this to move the needle even slightly. It's still not a fully gap closing class, but at least you got a number and you had some potential difference makers at the top along with some developmental potential. So I think Davis Andrews, Dewan Lane, you need to get one of them in my estimation.
And I don't know that they're going to get either one of them. That's the thing. Like you said, Davis Andrews, I think they probably have the best shot at. But, I mean, here's the thing. He's seen all the schools he wants to go to. He's considering. Yep. If he saw all of them and Notre Dame was the no-brainer, I want to go Notre Dame, he would have committed to Notre Dame by now.
I think so too.
Right? He doesn't yet know that you could say, okay, maybe Notre Dame's number one on his list right now, but it's close enough to where he wants to see all these schools again for official visits. That's concerning for me. There's clearly something that's keeping Notre Dame from being able to close on these guys. I mean, they can offer playing time. There's nothing Notre Dame can't offer right now, and they're just not able to close.
Should be an easy sell at safety right now.
It should be a super easy sell right now, but it's not.
Yeah.
For guys that should be easy sells. I mean, you've talked to Davis Andrews a bunch. That should be a no-brainer Notre Dame kid. Dewan Lane should be a no-brainer Notre Dame kid. Jalen McClain, I don't fault him for because he has interest beyond just football and academics. That's fine. It's it is what it is. But there's just guys you look at and say, man, like Marquise Gallegos, you're getting out recruited by Michigan right now for him. I mean, you just are. So you look and say, I don't know who they're going to take at safety. I mean, if you get Paul Menke and Oliver Miles to finish off this class, you're talking about two projects in there with Kennedy Urlacher and Oliver Miles. Oliver Miles is the safety version of last year's defensive line. Right? I mean, he could end up being really good. He's tall, he's long, he's fast, he's athletic, he's explosive, but he's a low floor, high ceiling guy, and you don't know which is going to pan out, right?
Yep.
Paul Menke's a good football player. He's not, in my opinion, as good as the two guys we just talked about. So it's a solid safety class. But to me, that's not a gap closing class. That's a gap widening class, in my opinion, from the top schools. Yep. If you don't get one of Davis Andrews or Dewan Lane or Jalen McClain, who, again, we don't anticipate them getting.
Oh, yeah. If they can land a Jalen McClain, it's a completely different conversation.
Right. But right now, I would predict right now, I would say Notre Dame is probably the leader for only one of those guys. And it's a very tedious lead. Would you agree with that, Ryan? I'm referring to Davis Andrews. And you would even be able to know if I'm even wrong on that one. I don't even think would you agree with that? That they're probably his leader right now?
I think Notre Dame's the leader, but I do think that there's some pull for Davis to maybe stay out west. I think that might be a little bit of a pull because you're seeing one of the other schools that are in the mix, Brian, I mentioned, right? The two official visits that he has scheduled at this point are also UCLA and Utah. And his faith is important to him, right? He's Mormon. He's a guy that also might take a mission at some point. Like that might be in the conversation. So I just think there's a little bit of a cloudy situation there, but I do think Notre Dame's the leader for Davis Andrews. I do.
So it's tedious at this point in time, Ryan. Yeah. I'm going to throw an extra guy in there. This is my asterisk because I wouldn't count it as a top 5, but I really feel like because there's some other positions that are just greater needs.
Yeah.
But to me, there's a guy out there that if they can land this guy, it says a lot about where the program is heading. And also, I do think he's a lot more important than maybe we're talking about because of what's happening on the current roster and what I think is going to happen over the next year. And that's Keidron Young. He's a must get for me, honestly. Now, if they get Anthony Carey or guys like that, I'm fine. Those are good football players. But Keidron Young, to me, is on my list because he has something that I just feel like a lot of the other backs don't have. And I would include the current roster of backs don't have. It's that combination of size, power, and speed. He's a bit of a combination of Audric Estime and Jadarian Price to me. Like, that's what I see. He's got that home run speed. I don't know if he's quite as fast as Jadarian, but he's got the home run ability that Jadarian brought to the table. He's not as big as Audric, but he's big and he's physical. And he plays a similar style. To me, that's the kind of kid, if you can get him and beat those Texas schools for him, he's a guy that some are now putting up in the top 100 rankings. Don't care about that, but perception-wise, it matters. But if you can dip into Texas for a kid like that you had no previous relationship with from, being at a Texas school, like with Chancey last year with the Texas kids, that shows me that this offensive staff is and it's a public school, right? I mean, that matters to me as far as what it means. Is like, wow, that's impressive. He's the kind of kid, Ryan, that it fills a big need because I don't know if there's that next power back in the class or on the roster after Audric is gone. And I don't know that Audric's going to be back in 2024.
Yeah.
And he's a really talented kid. So there's a lot need, fit, what it would mean about this offensive staff. All of that makes him that guy would be a big time guy, in my opinion.
And just for the 2024 perspective, he would also be a fantastic complement to Aeneas Williams. Like they would mesh very well together, in my opinion, because they are very different football players. Keidron is the 220-pound hammer that once he gets into the open, you're like, oh, he can run a little bit faster than maybe we anticipated. Aeneas Williams is much more going to get him involved in the passing game, going to run a little bit inside zone, going to throw him some screens. You're going to do that type of stuff. So I think the combination makes a whole lot of sense. I agree with you. After Audric Estime is gone, your biggest back on the roster becomes Jadarian Price, at least until Jeremiah Love grows into his frame a little bit, most likely, right? So, I mean, there is a situation where I think you do need a little bit more size at the running back position moving forward to add to the home run potential that you have in that backfield. I mean, Jadarian Price has home run potential. Jeremiah Love has home run potential. I think Jabron Pate even has a little bit of that twitch where you say, like, he can create some explosive plays. But you don't really have that bell cow looking back. And I think someone in the chat just said that Audric Estime looks like a Alabama running back, right? Like he looks like that SEC. Keidron Young, excuse me. I think I didn't say Keidron Young, but Keidron Young is that type of running back. And again, outside of the impact of just having his style of play on this roster too, Brian, getting into Texas consistently, man. Like that's the thing that we keep talking about. It's huge. I mean, you had 4 in 2023. You have 1 in 2024 already with Leonard Moore. You can also
expect them to be up to 2 by the end of the summer, right? At the very least.
You're in a good spot with Logan Thomas as well, right? So if you back up a 4-man class in 2023 with another 3-man or more potential class in 2024, you're in a good spot.
And here's the thing, Ryan. It's premium positions. It's running back, it's corner, it's edge, right? Like when they were going into Texas before, they were getting good players, but it was like tight end Durham Smythe, tight end Brock Wright, defensive end Nana, defensive tackle Hunter Spears, who I loved in high school before his second knee injury. Like if he doesn't have that second knee injury, I'm telling you what, Hunter Spears has a completely different career at Notre Dame. But it's those kind of guys. I mean, then when you were getting skill players out of Texas, it was like, like Corey Robinson one year and then like Jalen Brown at corner, Cam McDaniel. It wasn't like the premium skill guys. Keidron Young is a premium skill guy to me.
Right.
Braylon James and Jaden Greathouse and Caleb Smith were premium skill guys to me. Like because we're talking about getting impact talent, right? So there's this notion of, Florida produces more NFL talent than anybody. And well, that's not true. I had this in the article the other day. If you look at the last 5 drafts, do you know what state was number 1 in producing most NFL talent? You know the answer to this, Ryan. So it's a rhetorical question.
I was soon Texas.
It was not Florida. It was Texas. They had 155. Florida was next with 150. The number 3 state, Georgia, was 108. So there's a big drop off between Florida, Texas, and Georgia. Well, Notre Dame's never going to make a killing in Florida. They're just not. I mean, that's just the reality of where we are now. They're just not going to. They'll get a kid here, a kid there, but they're not going to get 7 kids in the 3-year span like Notre Dame has a chance to do in the state of Texas. And to get premium, because if they got 7, right? So let's say they get Kedron Young, and let's say they get Logan Thomas.
Yep.
In the 3 years since Marcus Freeman was hired, they would have landed 7 players from Texas, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a corner, and an edge rusher.
Yep.
All premium skill talent, big skill in the other type of skill, right? That's huge. That says a lot. Where did Ohio State get a lot of their premium skill talent in the last several years?
Texas.
Yeah. Texas. And it's not just the receiver class. Where's J.K. Dobbins from? Right? I mean, so Ohio State was smart to do that. They got way ahead of Notre Dame in that regard, right, Ryan? Yep. But Notre Dame's at least catching up under Marcus Freeman, and they're making Texas a priority, something the previous staff never did and should have done. And Ohio State proved that these kids will leave the state. These kids will go up to where it's cold because they're smarter. And there's parts of Texas that get pretty freaking cold. You know what I mean? It's just the reality of it. So you'll get these kids to leave the state much more than to leave the South much more so than you'll get from Florida, because they may leave Florida, but a lot of them aren't going to leave the South. And I think that's something that Notre Dame is figuring it out. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. I'm really looking forward to seeing that.
Yep. But I really do think that Texas can be very pro Notre Dame moving forward. Like, I think that you can potentially get 3 to 4 guys out of Texas almost every single year if you're Notre Dame, because I think there is an attraction there. I do, because you talk about the school systems being better down in Texas. You talk about the allure and the prestige of football still being a paramount thing for the state of Texas and players that grew up there. I think that there is an allure to a place like Notre Dame, which I think that they're starting to prove over the last couple of cycles. Right. They need to continue it.
So Ryan, that's going to kind of do it for that recruiting section. I'm going to hold off on our third topic for another day. Okay. Because we've gone over 2 hours now with these other 2 topics, and we were going to talk about the Big Ten decision but the discussion about not playing not mandating a Power 5 game out of conference, which is total bull crap. But we're going to dive into that another time, because if we dive into that, we're not going to have time for the mailbag, and I really want to get to the mailbag.
Yeah.
So, but before we get to the mailbag, Ryan, I want to ask everybody, hit that like button, everybody, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. And I wanted to talk about something else a little bit too, before we move on to there. So there's a really cool thing that's happening right now, and I wanted to discuss with you guys, and I wanted to get into this. I know that Sean Stiers talked about it last night. I'd asked him to talk about it. We want to talk about it again as well. They are doing an organization called Chad Tough, and it is an organization that was founded by CJ Carr's parents, Jason and Tammy. And it is about CJ's little brother, Chad, who passed away, I think it was 2014, of a brain tumor and it's a very rare and mostly fatal. It's a very high fatality rate, and it forms either in the brain or in the spinal cord, and it's almost exclusively in children. And so they're doing some fundraising for that. They've done a ton of it over the last couple of years, and they're doing something really fun now that I wanted to kind of let people know about. And it's an auction that they have, and there's a lot of really cool stuff on there. I'm actually going to put a link in the description box about the auction. And if you go to the actual auctions, there's some really cool stuff in there. There was an auction for a Notre Dame USC giveaway in there. There's some other cool things in there. There's one that it's when you bid on it, and if you win the auction, you get it. There's another one on there that was for like being able to throw out a first pitch at a baseball game, which was a Tigers game, which is pretty cool. Like you and 18 people, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of cool things in there that you can go to. The reality is the bidding, Ryan, is very expensive. And it's going to be out of my price range and most of the other people's price ranges on here. So I'm also including in here a link to just their main page where you can just go donate whatever you can. And it's a great cause. Obviously, it's not just about, a family that went through a tragedy that I can't imagine what it's like, because I've never I didn't lose a sibling like that. but they've turned their grief into a great cause. And they're saying, hey, we want to do what we can to make sure that other families maybe someday won't ever have to experience what we went through. And I have such great respect for people like that, because a lot of people, when they go through tragedy, Ryan, they just want to bury it and not, just pretend it isn't there and run away from it. And they are embracing it and using their name and their experience to really make a difference. And if there's any way we can support that at Irish Breakdown, we definitely want to do that. So I had a good chat with Mrs. Carr the other day, and we'll probably do something with them next year as far as kind of having a thing to auction off with them too. Maybe your membership, hanging out with us, doing some things with us, doing some different functions in Irish Breakdown. So we'll figure something out really cool next year. But I did want to get those things out there and bring those up before we get there. Look, there's a lot of Michigan stuff on there. I mean, but there's some things that just that stuff doesn't matter anymore. We start talking about this kind of thing. And so I just wanted to bring that to y'all's attention. And if you're able to and willing to give, please do so. I put links to the auctions on there as well. And then of course there's also just if you can't do, because like I said, that stuff, Ryan, I'm looking through these cool. I'm, ooh, that'd be cool. What's the price? Yeah, it's out of my price range. Like, nope, can't do that. But there's also you can just give. And so that's a pretty cool deal too. So definitely check that out. Those links are in the description box below. So Mr. Roberts, it's mailbag time.
Yes, sir.
And I want to have some fun here. Obviously we have some really good questions here in the mailbag, and let's dive into them right now. Let's start off here with Rob Osgood.
Rob says, mailbag, I'll start. Top 10 must-haves, ? 5 of them must be either offensive line or safety. Those are the two areas in where I feel it is needed. I am excited on the path the team is going, but those two areas are my concern.
So let's have some fun with this question, Ryan. If you could say, what's the 5 players at those two positions that if Notre Dame needs to land to have a gap closing class, what would it be? Here's mine. Gilby Lambert, Grant Bricks, DeJuan Lane, Davis Andrews would be 4. And then my number 5, that's because I don't know if I wouldn't necessarily agree with Rob that it's 5. If they get the right 2, then I would live with that. But here's who I would say would be number 5. If you get Gilby and Davis Andrews, here's who my number 5 would be. Oliver Miles. And the reason I say Oliver Miles is this, because you did get the floor plus ceiling a little bit better with Davis Andrews and DeJuan Lane. You got that. You've already got Kennedy Urlacher in the class. If I'm going to go to 4, it either needs to be a dude like a Jalen McClain, who you're not going to get, or it needs to be a guy with a really high ceiling with some positional flexibility. And that's what Oliver Miles is to me. He could be a safety. He could be a nickel. He could be a big corner. The way he runs, he's a guy that you could put on offense and play receiver if the need was there. I mean, he's a very versatile type of athlete that's very raw, but has an incredibly high ceiling. So if I was going to go to 5, I'd rather get an additional safety in this class than an additional offensive lineman, because of your numbers on the offensive line, you're good. You needed tackles in this class. And if you get Bricks and Gilby, you're good there. There's no way I'm taking 5 offensive linemen in this class unless, like, I don't know, some star, like just some dude wanted to sign up. And I don't know who that would be in this year's class. Yeah. To be honest, like there's no Samson in this class. I mean, even Brandon Baker's a really good player, but is he Monroe Freeling? Is he Samson Okunlola? Is he those? I don't know if he's that guy. Yeah. So that would be my 5. If I could say what's my dream class of somewhat realistic candidates on those two positions, that would be my ideal finish, Ryan, if I had to go 5.
And out of those two positions, I would break it down the same. I would go 2 offensive linemen and 3 safeties in that situation. Offensive line wise, again, this isn't as realistic as maybe it would be with Gilby Lambert and Grant Bricks, but I would love Gilby Lambert and Liam Andrews. If you could somehow convince Liam Andrews to come play at Notre Dame, I think that he has some tackle flexibility. I think if nothing else, he's going to be a really darn good player inside. So those would be my 2 offensive linemen. Safeties, we're on the same pathway on 2 of them. I think DeJuan Lane and Davis Andrews are the clearest top priorities on the board for me. I actually slightly prefer Paul Menke to Oliver Miles, so I would probably go with Menke over Miles. But it's a conversation that we could have because
so I don't disagree with that statement you just said. I think Paul Menke is a better player than Oliver Miles right now. There's no doubt. He is a much higher floor. But that's also part of the reason I went with him as my fourth, because like Menke's a safety, right? That's the thing. Dewan Lane's a safety, Menke's a safety, Davis Andrews is a safety, Kennedy Erlicker's a safety. The reason I went with a guy like Paul Miles or Oliver Miles is simply because he does bring you some like who'd be the nickel? Who's the guy that you could say that's my future nickel of that 4-man group that you just mentioned? That would be my concern, right, Ryan? So I agree with your sentiment. So for me, it wasn't that I don't like Paul Menke more. I like Paul Menke more than Oliver Miles. It's that ceiling plus positional flexibility. Because I feel like if you're going to take 4 safeties in a class, one of them has to be able to do something else, in my opinion. Because otherwise, now you've gone over numbers wise that now you run the risk of, well, what if one of those guys leaves in a year because he's 4th in that class? Sure. That was kind of where I was coming from on that. But Paul Menke is definitely a better prospect as of right now than Oliver Miles. I don't disagree with that. I just see. Well, I think the ceiling with Miles is really high.
I think at least one of those 4, though, on my list, I think could be a Rover potentially in that situation. So he could play in the slot a little bit. Obviously not a true nickel, but like could be that big slot type of player.
It's fair. It's fair. Let's go to John A1.
John A1 says the Rover position at Notre Dame seems to require very unique qualities and yet demands tremendous athletic ability. Do other college defenses have a similar position with similar traits? What makes a good Rover?
You want to take a shot at that, Ryan? Because I mean, I have some thoughts on that.
So John, there are a lot of teams that use kind of a hybrid, some similar to a 4-2-5. They are. So there are a lot of basically what's happened is that the Sam position has gotten a little bit phased out, and they've just made that guy more of a hybrid safety / linebacker, a guy that can play in the box when you need him to, but he can also be that guy that's going to play overhang, going to play a lot in the slot, and going to be able to play from depth a little bit more than what your traditional Sam linebacker would do working in space. So a lot of teams do use that now. Some of the qualities, and this is more specific to Notre Dame, that you really want in a Rover position. 1, you want length, you want explosiveness. That's 2 of the biggest things. Because the reason you want length for me, John, is that with length usually comes size, and enough size to be able to, when an offense is reduced, that you can come down and he can play in the box when you need him to. He's not a guy that's just a pure space player. That's a nickel. That's the guy that's going to be more in that situation, or a safety. You need a guy that can be able to potentially come play down in the box. So usually length coincides with size. You're able to add size to that position. Short area explosiveness, though, is a big thing for me. You need a guy that can really react quickly, change direction, think about coming down on screens, running the alley, coming inside out. The explosiveness to really work to the perimeter is a big time thing. And then I think, again, that versatility to also, you have to play in the box at times, but you also have to play outside as far as working in space. That versatility is a big function as well.
So Ryan, I gotta talk about something here real quick that I just saw pop up on Twitter. So I'm tweeting out tweeting my story. Who's Blake Brockermeyer? Is that the guy that used to
Blake Brockermeyer?
Yeah, it's the guy that works for 24/7 Sports.
Okay, no, I'm not sure.
He just released his top 5 draft eligible offensive linemen.
Oh no, I don't want to hear this. Okay,
yes, you do. Number 1 has Olu Fashanu. I'm okay with that. I wouldn't agree with it, but okay.
Okay, yeah.
Number 2, another offensive tackle, J.C. Latham.
Okay.
Number 3, Cooper Beebe.
Okay.
And number 4, Joe Alt. Number 5 is Amarius Mims, who you talked about earlier, right?
High upside. Yep.
But you can't put him 5 right now. You can't put him 5 unless it's a pure projection. But
probably is.
J.C. Latham and Cooper Beebe over Joe Alt. Yeah. Yeah.
That's fun. I actually think somebody put that in the chat earlier a little bit ago.
Did they really?
Yeah, I think someone mentioned that slightly. So yeah.
Like seriously.
Yeah. I like Cooper Beebe, but he's a second round offensive guard. Like he's a good player, but yeah.
Joe Alt number 4. Come on, man. Look, I know we're Notre Dame guys, right? But we try to be objective. Yeah. Some of this stuff, Ryan, just gets to the point where it's like, you're either like trolling us at this point in time, or you're just really not good at this. And I think Blake Brockermeyer, that's the offensive lineman that was a big recruit recently, isn't he?
Isn't Tommy Brockermeyer was the offensive line, right?
That's the brother. That's
Oh,
the
is there?
highly
I didn't
ranked
know there was a
brother.
second. I didn't know there was a second.
So it's either the dad or
Okay.
the younger son, because he had two sons. No,
Yeah.
it's got to be the dad. Yeah, it's got to be the dad who played offensive line in the NFL for a long time. That's who it's got to be.
Okay.
So because he's got his son Tommy, and then he had Luke and James. Yeah. So, yeah, Tommy and James are twins. They're in the same class, and
Mm-hmm.
they went to Alabama. So it's the
We
dad who made that list.
We should get this guy on the podcast and have a discussion with him.
Yes. I'm gonna give him Joe Alt's dad's number. I'm talking out with Mr. Alt.
Joe Alt's dad is massive too, right? He's a big dude.
Hey, very tall.
Oh yeah,
Very
because he played offensive tackle in the NFL.
Yeah.
It's a stupid question.
I
Yeah,
walked
John
by
Alt's
him at the
huge.
South Carolina game. He had like knee wraps on, because like, and I'm 6 feet tall and my knees at 45 are killing me. I couldn't imagine being like 6'8", but he's a very tall guy.
Yeah.
Very tall guy.
Ugh.
Yeah, very tall guy. I saw that. I just, come on, man. What are we doing here? What are we doing? DMND13, he said, just wanted to throw a plug out there for the new CFB Nation show that came out about the updated post-spring practice top 25 rankings. There's another video that's going to come out. Bill and Bill show on the CFB All-America show on CFB Nation. It's Bill Bender and Bill Troche from Sporting News. They talk about they rank the quarterback rooms in the SEC and the Big Ten. That's second part of this week's show. So the podcast form of that is already out. Both of those are out. The video will be out on that here very soon as well. So yeah, thank you for that, DM and Dan. Definitely some really good content today from the CFB All-America guys. Very, very good content on them. Coleman Smith. Here we go. Let's get back on track.
Coleman says, on a scale of 1 to 10, what are both of your confidence levels that we land Justin Scott and Elijah Rushing now?
So mine on Justin Scott is a 6 right now. I'm not as high as my sources are on that one. Like my sources are very confident they're going to get him and all that, but I'm a little bit punch drunk from last year, right? And I got a little bit, PTSD from last year's cycle where when a kid says one thing to a staff, but then just won't visit because, I've already been there a bunch of times. Okay. You can't make it back for one weekend in the month of June. And I'm supposed to believe that when you make your decision before the summer, a school that you didn't come to our spring game, you didn't come see us in April, in May, you didn't come see us in June. I'm supposed to believe that you're going to commit to us in the summer. I can't do it. So if he doesn't visit in June, my confidence level is going to plummet because we've been here before. Right. And he's a different kid. Right. So I'm not saying, well, he's just like Keanu Paint Bone. But what I am saying is the lesson that we learned last year was it's not always what these kids say to people. It's follow their footsteps, right? Where they go.
Yep.
And with Justin, he's saying all the right things to Notre Dame. And I believe that I believe he means it. But my whole point is, but if it's really to the point where you're going to come to Notre Dame and pick Notre Dame, I have to think that you're going to come back again since late March, early February, or early April. Yeah. I just have a hard time with that one. To your point, it's an hour and a half drive. You can come on a Tuesday or you know what I mean? So now I'm not saying he has to take an official visit. If he loves Notre Dame and is ultimately going to pick Notre Dame, he may say, hey, I'm just going to come on an unofficial for a couple of days and then take my official in the fall. Yeah. I want to do my official Ohio State weekend or something like that. Sure. USC weekend, something like that. Totally fine. But he has to at least visit in June. And if he doesn't, then my confidence level is going to go down. So I'm at a 6 now. I still feel like Notre Dame is the leader, but I'm just not as confident as maybe some of my sources are that they're going to get Justin Scott.
That's fair.
So thoughts on that, Ryan, and then I'll give mine on Elijah next.
I think we're relatively in the same ballpark there. I might say 7, just going up a little bit. Because I really do think that Notre Dame is. I think that it just makes so much sense that he lands with the University of Notre Dame when all is said and done. But to your point, Brian, the longer you're out there, the more that you're seeing and the less activity on the Notre Dame side, there is cause for concern. So that's one of the situations where actions speak a lot louder than words. I mean, there were a couple of recruits that we learned that easily from in the 2023 class. So I still think Notre Dame has a very good chance at Justin Scott, but it's definitely not as confident as it once was, for sure.
The next one, Elijah Rushing. I'm at a 5 right now, Ryan. I'm actually up
Wow,
from where
really?
I was. Yeah, I'm at a 5 because again, I'm following the actions, right? What are the actions that
Yeah,
we see? Constant engagement with the Notre Dame staff.
sure.
Saying all the right things, like not the right things is like the things I want to hear, but the trigger words that I look for about a kid and recruiting me harder than anybody else. We've heard him say that.
Yep.
Uh, and I've always felt he was a Notre Dame fit. It just was like, can you convince him that he's a Notre Dame fit? And I think that's sales pitch is starting to take hold. I'm not ready to go any higher than a 5 because 5 is like 50-50 right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that visit's going to determine whether it shoots way up or shoots way down. But right now, look, name me another team that has gained more positive vibes with him than Notre Dame in the last few weeks. There isn't one.
Yeah.
Notre Dame is the charging team, and it's Arizona and Oregon that are kind of trying to hold Notre Dame back, in my opinion. That's how I look at it.
Sure.
So yeah, I feel like they've made a nice charge. If I had to predict today, would I pick Notre Dame? No, because otherwise I'd give them a higher than a 5. But I think they're putting themselves in position, Ryan, that with a great visit in June, they could be, because right, it's about who wins in the end. It's not about who was there at the beginning.
Sure.
But the difference between Elijah and maybe some other guys on the board is that Elijah, and this is like the difference between Elijah and Malachi, for example. I would actually say today, I'm more optimistic they're going to get Elijah than I am Malachi. Here's why. Malachi didn't have a lot of interest in Notre Dame. His coach and his mom convinced him to come. He visited, loved it, and genuinely loved it. But I still think ultimately he's going to go back to his first loves, which is like a Penn State type of team, right? Elijah, I really feel like his first loves were staying close to home or going to Notre Dame. And then, of course, Oregon and some other schools got in the mix and got involved, and it got flashy and all that other kind of stuff. And now I feel like his first love is kind of coming back around. Because like when he first visited a year ago, Ryan, we're thinking like this, they got a great shot with this kid. I mean, they got a great shot with this kid. Faded, and now they're coming back. So I'd much rather be that school that's been in his mind for a lot longer, and now you're trying to reignite that love, than for that spark to happen during a great visit that then fades over the next couple months. That's my fear with like a Malachi, for example. I hope I'm wrong because I love that kid. But yeah, I'm a little bit higher on Elijah. Now, again, a 5 does not equal I'm putting a crystal ball out tomorrow, right? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying like I think they're at least trending right now in a positive direction for me.
Yeah. I think they're definitely trending. I would probably go with 4 though, just because I just think there's a lot that needs to happen in that one, right? So like we're not far off. You said a 5, I'll say a 4, right? Like that's kind of where we are. I think that Notre Dame is certainly in the game. They are certainly gaining momentum. They are certainly heading in a much better direction than it once was. I just think that there are going to be some schools that are going to be kind of nipping at the heels as well, right? Like I think that's why it makes me a little less optimistic, just because if this was a situation where it was like 3 teams that were in the conversation, right? And then you needed a big visit, I think that you could potentially separate it. But it's just like, it's hard to really point to a couple teams that are Elijah, right? It's like Oregon, Florida, Arizona, the pool to stay. Like there's just a few schools that I think are still heavily involved in this recruitment. So that's just kind of why I'm going to stick at a 4 for now. But again, to your point, this could completely change after the visit. We'll see. Because I mean, there was a time, Brian, like I remember when they offered him originally, he was like, Notre Dame this is a very pro Notre Dame community. I'm a Catholic kid. Like a lot of things that would point to him being a Notre Dame kid. And he's a 3.8 GPA kid, right? Like he's a very intelligent kid. So it all makes sense that he lands at Notre Dame. I just really need to see how the visit goes, because that's going to be the make or break for me.
Which is why we're at 4 and 5. Right. There's a lot of things going in the right direction, but they got to really knock this visit out. I mean, and it's got to be a home run. It's got to be a home run.
Yep.
Because if I thought the visit was trending towards him committing, I'd be like at a 7.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's definitely still work to be done.
No
Jake Smith says, "Hey guys, I'm working at the moment, but just wanted to drop in and say that I appreciate you guys and the whole crew behind IB. Always great content. Seems like we have an opportunity to be great in 2023. Thank you very much for that, Jake. Very, very much.
And agree.
Absolutely agree.
Next question is from Adam Blair. It says, Brian, who's a better high school junior, Blake Fisher or Gerby Lambert?
Blake Fisher. Definitely Blake Fisher.
Yeah.
Gerby is still pretty raw as a player, right? I mean, Blake was a big monster as a junior. Now, Blake needed work conditioning wise, but Blake was a really talented kid. Blake would be that guy for me. And I also think Blake brought even more positional flexibility. Could play either tackle spot, could play guard. I would go with Blake. It's not an enormous advantage for Blake, but Blake for me was at the same age.
I remember seeing a video of Blake Fisher playing center in high school, and I'm just like, what am I watching right now? This is insane. Like a 330
he ain't that versatile.
Like, what?
He ain't that versatile. Yeah. But I'd say Blake. Now, Gerby's upside is enormously high, and I would argue we could have a debate about similar upsides, but Blake was just further along as a junior. I think it's probably the best way to say it, Ryan. Probably the best way to say it. Well, what would your answer be for that one?
I don't really remember Blake as a junior. I remember him more as a senior. So
Okay.
I think this would be I think that, Adam, this is a great question after senior year Gerby, and then we could talk about senior year Blake and senior year Gerby. I think that would be a really interesting conversation. Next question is from Archer452, says Brad Crawford at 247 Sports put out his college football projections as Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, and Michigan. Urban Meyer said, it's hard to say Texas doesn't have the best roster in college football.
No, it's not.
Where is all the UT love coming from?
It's actually not that hard to say that Texas doesn't have the best roster in college football because they don't.
Oh, Urban.
And of course he says it now, everybody's jumping on board. And I look, could Texas be a playoff team this year? Sure.
It's possible. Yeah.
But you're telling me that a team that went 8-5 last year that is going to all of a sudden jump out and beat Bama at Bama or lose to Bama really close and then run the rest of the table the rest of the way in a Big 12? I mean, number one, I would argue the Big 12 is the hardest conference to go undefeated in right now because no matter who you are, you have to beat somebody twice to go undefeated. Yeah. It's not possible to go undefeated in the Big 12 without beating somebody twice. That's why when people because we know what the response from Big 10 people is going to be when they go to this move of not playing and not. Well, why should we have to play? We look at all the teams in our conference. We've got USC and UCLA and Michigan. I'm like, but who plays all them? You don't play all them. So stop talking to me. Oh, the SEC. So we have to play this team and this. Georgia and Alabama hardly ever play in the regular season. Hardly ever. Alabama and Florida don't play that very often in the regular season, right? Tennessee has to play Alabama every year, but then they got to play the rest of the SEC East. They don't have to play LSU and Auburn and those other teams every year. So stop coming to me with look at who's in our conference because you don't play everybody in your conference. You know who does play every single team in your conference and at least one team twice? It's the Big 12.
Big 12, yeah.
So that's a tough league to go undefeated in unless you're just way better than everybody else. And even a lot of those Oklahoma teams that Lincoln Riley had, they rarely went undefeated. I don't think Lincoln Riley ever had a team that had less than 2 losses. And now, again, the reason I'm saying 2 losses is because they would always lose in the postseason.
Right.
But every year, 10-12-2, 12-2, 12-2, 12-2, 9-2, 10-2, because every year they lost in the regular season. I think one year they lost to Iowa State in his first year, went on the road and beat Ohio State by 15, but lost to Iowa State. Barely beat Baylor that year in a shootout, 49-41. Beat Texas 29-24. Beat Texas Tech by 7. Had another close game against, it was close for a while. They ended up pulling away from Oklahoma State 62-52. But again, lost to Iowa State. 2018 Oklahoma. They lost to Texas. Now they got a rematch win over Texas. Remember that year they also had that crazy shootout at West Virginia. I remember that. Was I in LA that weekend? It would be 2018. So 2018 Notre Dame ended the season against USC. So I was out in LA that weekend for the Notre Dame game. And I remember watching that game in the hotel. Like, this is a crazy game. Whoever has the ball last is going to win. It was at Will Greer. They had like David Stills, Gary Jennings. You remember that receiving core that they had back then? It was really good. That was a phenomenal game. But it was not easy for that Oklahoma team to go undefeated. 2019, I think they lost to Iowa State again. No, they lost to Kansas State that year, barely beat Texas in a close game, but they dominated their non-conference. Then 2020, that was a year where I think they only played Big 12 teams. No, did did they play out of conference that year? Yeah, played Missouri State. Lost 2 games in the Big 12 that year to Kansas State and Iowa State. And then in his last year at Oklahoma in 2021, they went out and lost another regular season game to Baylor by 13. So when was the last time a Big 12 team went undefeated? Now, TCU went undefeated in the regular season.
Yeah.
And look what happened. They lost but it was a rematch. They lost a rematch. It's hard to beat a team twice. They lost a rematch to Kansas State. So you're telling me they're going to either beat Bama on the road or they're going to go undefeated in the Big 12. I have a hard time with that, because is this roster at Texas that much better than what Oklahoma had from 17 to 20, or 17 to 19 is probably the 3. 20 is when you started to see a little bit of a decline from Oklahoma, but 17, 18, and especially and 19, especially that 18 team, those are really good Oklahoma teams, and they never ran the table. Never ran the table. So I have a hard time believing that Texas is going to be that team or projecting it. Now, could it happen? Sure. But you're predicting it? I have a hard time with that, Ryan. Very hard time with that one.
I mean, I just hyper focus on that they have the most talented roster in college football. Like, that's just the absurd take, in my opinion, right? Like, I don't think it's absurd to say, could they potentially be a playoff team? Like, sure, it's possible, right? But I mean, they have a more talented roster than Georgia?
No.
Ohio State?
No.
Alabama?
Not even close.
Like,
not even close.
Yeah, I know.
Now, you could argue, Ryan, to your point, that offensively we could have a conversation that they're in there for one of the most talented rosters offensively. Because, like, here's an example. Like, I would take Notre Dame starting 11 over Texas starting 11, personally.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing. You start looking at they got Malik Murphy as their backup quarterback. Arch Manning is their 3, right? I mean, I like Kenny Minchie, but if I had Malik Murphy, I'll take him. Right. Notre Dame's number 3 talent quarterback for me is Steve Angeli. I think Arch Manning's overrated. He's way better than Steve Angeli, in my opinion. They've got some very talented young running backs, unproven. Okay. They're very talented receiver. They got the Mitchell kid, obviously, you talked about earlier. Jatavian Sanders is a really talented tight end. They've got some young guys, though. There's some depth there that I really like. It's when you get to the defensive side of the ball that you lose me with this whole talented roster in college football thing. That's where you lose me, because their talent on defense is not in the same conversation. Like, the talent at Georgia, you could argue that Texas has a more talented roster than Georgia on offense. You can have that argument. I wouldn't buy it, because I think Georgia still has a significantly more talented offensive line. Would you agree with that, Ryan?
Yes.
And so Texas has more talent at quarterback, receiver, that Texas has more talent. Running back, it's close, but I'd give the edge to Georgia. Tight end, it's Georgia. It's you can at least have a conversation, and I wouldn't say you're nuts for saying Texas has more talented offensive roster than Georgia. Defense is not even close.
No, it's not.
It's not even the same universe defensively. Same thing with Alabama. Does Texas have a better roster than Alabama does on offense? I would say yes. When you take all of it together, is it close on defense? No, it's not.
It's not.
And that's where you lose me with that. And I would argue, I'd make the same argument on offense, except in this case, I don't think Texas necessarily has a better offense than Ohio State, talent-wise, roster-wise. They do at quarterback, running back-wise, I'm taking Ohio State. Receiver-wise, I'm taking Ohio State. Tight end-wise, it's a wash. I'd say wash when you look at the depth. Offensive line, I'd give the edge to Texas right now. But, I'd say Ohio State has the better defensively. It's again, I'd still give the edge to Ohio State.
Yes.
And I don't love Ohio State's talent on defense. So you lose me with that stuff, Ryan. You are correct on that. No. Unless we're talking about playing a 7-on-7 game. But no, I can't get there on that one. The other 3 playoff teams, I mean, look, you're basically picking the same teams as last year. Okay, whatever. It's a little lazy, but I get it. Because you look at Michigan and Ohio State, Ryan. I predict Ohio State to beat Michigan this year. I do. I think they will go to Ann Arbor and beat them. But if you're basically, what you're saying is either you lose to Michigan and beat Notre Dame, or you lose to Notre Dame but then beat Michigan. Either way gives you a good chance. Plus, beat Penn State gives you a pretty good chance to be a playoff team, right? Yeah. Where Michigan's got to run the table. If they have to beat Ohio State. They can't afford to lose to Ohio State and make it, because if they lose to Ohio State, what's your resume at that point in time? Who'd you beat?
Yeah.
because their schedule is ridiculously soft, like embarrassingly so. I don't want to hear a single Michigan fan ever talk about Notre Dame's ducking Michigan. First of all, shut up. That's not how it happens. Second of all, you're going to look at who Notre Dame plays and then look at who Ohio State and Michigan plays in a non-conference and tell me that Notre Dame's ducking somebody? Please. It's embarrassing. It really is. It's embarrassing. But, I mean, I don't have a Final Four yet, Ryan, so I'm not going to bang on his too much. I'm not even going to bang on the Texas one. I mean, there's a path for it. You know, if they go to Tuscaloosa and play a game similar to last year where it comes down to the wire and then run the table in the Big 12, Texas is probably a playoff team and probably should be a playoff team at that point in time.
Oh, yeah, I have nothing against Brad Crawford. My objection is more to the Urban Meyer analysis in this conversation.
Yeah. All right, let's get to we did get a series of super chats down here from Wicked Bronco Productions, so we'll go with number one here.
First question is thoughts on the way too early college football predictions. 1, Tennessee at 13-0. 2, Michigan at 12-1. 3, Oregon at 12-1. Notre Dame at 11-1. I like Tennessee a lot.
I see that.
You really do.
Yeah,
you love
I see that.
You don't like them. You love them.
I can't go there with you on the Tennessee one. I can't.
I think there's going to be a slight setback in Tennessee. I still think that they're going to be trending in a fine direction, but I think more like 9 wins this year, like 9-3, and then into the postseason, maybe they get the 10th win. Like that's kind of what I see. Just because I'm not a Joe Milton believer, and I'm not sold on Josh Heupel in year 3 having the depth of this roster that he needs yet to lose guys like Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman and those types of players, and then just reload all of a sudden. Like I'm just not there yet on that, but I think they will get there eventually if there's just remain a little bit patient, because I think he is recruiting at a pretty high level, but I think it's going to take another couple recruiting classes to get it to that level, in my opinion.
The other thing is being a team that plays Alabama every year, for Tennessee to go 13-0. I mean, if you were going to tell me 12-1, because I think at 12-1, I think there's a case to be made that Tennessee could have the number one seed because who they play. Mm-hmm. You can say, okay, let's say they lose at Alabama by a field goal and then run the table and follow it up with a win at Kentucky, win at Missouri, beat Georgia, and then win the SEC championship. Let's say they get a rematch against Bama and beat them. But here's the reality: for Tennessee to go 3-0 or 13-0, they have to beat Alabama on the road. They have to beat Georgia at home, and then they have to beat either Bama or LSU in a SEC title game.
Yeah.
I don't see that. I don't see that, man. I don't. Because not even just even if Joe Milton is as good as everybody says he's going to be this year, I don't see that. And they lost 2 really good receivers. I don't think the guys stepping in are that. The system will help them put up numbers, but they're not that.
Yeah.
And everything went right for Tennessee last year at home, and they still barely beat Alabama. Right? I just don't see that one. I don't see them going to Alabama and winning that game and then beating Georgia and then beating, let's say, LSU in the SEC title game or a rematch against Bama.
I'll say this: if they do go 13-0 this year, if Tennessee does something like that, then man, the Josh Heupel tenure in Tennessee is going to be silly, because I think that this is going to be a little bit of a reload year. Like I don't think this is going to be I don't think they're going to be as good as they were last year. I mean, if they're 13-0 this year, it's like, wow, man, that's
because it won't be a fluke, Ryan. It won't be a fluke. They play at Florida, home against South Carolina, home against A&M, at Bama, at Kentucky, at Missouri, home against Georgia, and then whoever they would play in the SEC title game.
And if you
that's
do that
not a fluke.
And if Josh Heupel does that, that means that he got a whole lot out of Joe Milton, where I'm like, oh, he is a quarterback whisperer.
What's he going to do with Nico? If he could do that with Joe Milton, you're like, what the freaking heck is he going to go do with Nico? Because Nico's a much better prospect than Joe Milton was coming out, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yep.
So, that would be tremendous. The other one's Michigan at number 2. I just think Michigan's going to lose multiple games this year. I do. I see them losing 2 games. Or number 3, Oregon. I'm not a believer in Oregon like that. I think Oregon's a good football team. I'm not a believer in them like that. Ryan, I don't know. What are your thoughts on Oregon being that kind of team? I
think the Pac-12 is going to kind of have a lot of parity. So I think teams are just going to beat themselves up. I've said this before. If there is a team that comes out, I think it's going to be Washington, just because I think that's the most production coming back.
Do not sleep on that September 9th game at Texas Tech. I'm telling you right now, do not sleep on that game. I like what Joey McGuire is doing at Texas Tech. I really do. They actually try and play defense now. Can you believe that, Ryan? They try and play defense now. They're not that good at it yet, but they try.
They just had the 7th overall pick on defense this past year. So
yeah. Notre Dame at 11-1. I'd be curious to who you have them losing to, and then kind of how you see that playing out. I don't know. I look at Oregon's schedule. It's going to be interesting. It's not a tough schedule, but it's also not an easy. They play at Washington, at Texas Tech, which I think is going to be a tougher game than people think. At Washington, at Utah, at Arizona State, home against USC, and then potentially a rematch against Utah or USC.
Yeah,
like that's going to be tough. I don't see them going. I don't see them as a one-loss team coming out of that. I don't.
Next super chat from Wicked Bronco Productions. Thank you again for all the contributions here. Buy or sell Notre Dame's chances to land Justin Scott.
Let's go one at a time.
Okay.
Let's go one at a time because sell every single one of those guys. Probably sell, especially since they're not recruiting a couple of those guys anymore. So let's go one at a time, Ryan.
Okay.
Buy
or sell chances to land Justin Scott.
I'm still buying that one.
I buy it. Yep.
Yeah.
Elijah Rushing, buy or sell.
I'm buying that one because of the direction it's going, but I'm not paying a whole lot for it.
I'm selling at the moment, but that could change very quickly. Caleb Beasley, buying or sell. Tennessee commits cornerback.
I'm buying that one.
I should buy that one too. I did
because it's about chances, right? And I like, yeah. Now, if his previous prediction is correct and Tennessee goes 13-0, it ain't happening. It ain't happening.
Yes. Jacob Smith,
sell. Because they're not recruiting him anymore. Yeah.
Kingston Villamoasa. I will buy that one for now.
Yep.
And keep it. Oh, sorry. Cole Sullivan.
Sell.
Yes. We're there.
Yep.
And then keeping Isaiah Canyon with the new SEC offers. I'm buying. Yes.
Yeah. I'm buying that one too. All right. Let's last one. This is the last super chat from him.
I appreciate you again, Wicked Bronco Productions.
Actually, I lied. He just put another super chat in there. So this is the last one that I had previously started.
We got a baller in the chat today, man. 2 things are always true in college football. No matter how bad or good Texas is or overrated, they have been. The AP and ESPN love their ranking teams by brand. Texas went 8-4 in an easy Big 12. Texas is back, folks. TCU or Baylor wins Big 12.
I'm going to somewhat disagree with part of what you said. I mean, you're correct. Texas and Michigan are like that. Texas A&M has been getting a lot of that unnecessarily love lately. Yes, they like to give those brands that hype that they don't deserve, in my opinion.
At least the Texas A&M stuff has stopped now.
Right. So, yes. Yeah. It was so bad that they finally stopped it. I'm going to disagree with the part about them going 8-4 in an easy Big 12. I do not agree with that at all. I think here's the problem that I think a lot of people have when it comes to evaluating the Big 12. And I think this is where a lot of people miss the boat. They look at the Big 12 and they say, well, there's not a great team in that league. And there isn't. There isn't a great team. There's no Georgia. There's no Ohio State. There's no Clemson in that league. I get it. But I would argue that that's as deep of a league as there is in college football. And every year we see this with top teams from the Big 12. You see these teams go out and these teams that nobody's ever heard of, and they lose to one of these in Iowa State or Kansas State. And then you see these teams go and get good matchups in bowl games and win bowl games. And so I think we're very much, we as a college football universe, we very much underappreciate the balance and the depth of the Big 12. And we assume it's not a strong league because it doesn't have a top level team. The Big 12 is a way better league than the ACC. Now the ACC has 2 teams at the top that I think are better than anybody that the Big 12 has in Clemson and Florida State. But after that, there's a big drop off in my opinion. And I would argue the same thing with the Pac-12. The Pac-12 might be better 1-2 than the Big 12, arguably. But 6, 7, 8, 9, the Big 12 is a much better conference than people give it credit for. Is it a great conference? No, but it is not an easy conference. And it's definitely not an easy conference to run the table in because there is such good depth. There's a lot more teams that can knock you off in that league than there are in the ACC. And I would even argue in the Big 10. The Big 10 is another one of those very top-heavy teams. Top 4 or 5 in the Big Ten, better than the top 4 or 5 in the Big 12. But it's just the depth of that league is so much better. I'm not saying it's better than the Big Ten. It's not, because the talent at the top matters. What I'm saying is the depth has to be taken into consideration for the quality of that league. And I think college football world does not give nearly enough credit to the Big 12 for how good it is from a depth standpoint. So not a great league, but for me, it's the number 3 league in the Power 5 level because of that depth. And I think people need to respect the Big 12 a little bit more, in my opinion. And heck, everybody thought Michigan was going to run TCU off the field last year. Oh, Big 10, so great. Michigan ran the table in the Big 10. They beat Ohio State. Nope. It's not how it played out.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's a much better league than people give it credit for, in my opinion.
I'm very interested with this take too, Brian, because obviously he mentions Baylor as potentially winning the Big 12. I don't know what to expect from Baylor this year. I'm not really sure. They're kind of a wild card team for me, man. I'm just not. I mean, TCU has to reload, obviously.
They're going to take a step back.
They're definitely going to take a step back. Baylor was really good 2 years ago. Last year, they took their step back. Does Dave Aranda have that roster now in a better spot where they have more depth to be able to kind of push forward? I hope so, because I really do like Dave Aranda. So that's an interesting team this year.
Yeah. Yeah. The quarterback's going to be the key for them. That's going to be the key for them.
Blake Shapen.
That's going to be the key. All right. And then we had one more super chat from Wicked Bronco Productions.
Said, I know it's just spring ball, but I have a little more confidence in Notre Dame beating Ohio State after watching their top 5 quarterback in college football, according to Ohio State fans. He looked like trash in the spring game.
Don't care. The year before, Justin Fields went 41-3, meaning 41 touchdowns and 3 picks, and led Ohio State into one of the best semifinal games ever. Was that Ohio State Clemson game that year that Ohio State lost late? It was a great game. He went like 3 of 14 or something like that, absurd in the spring game that year. You remember that? I don't know if he's that good. It's a spring game. It does not matter. I don't care what Kyle McCord did in the spring. He could have gone 1 of 15 and I wouldn't care. Right now, you want to see good things because it at least makes you feel better. Like, I've seen it. Right. But guys, there's so much evidence of spring games not being at all indicative of how a guy is going to play in the fall. And I'm just talking quarterback. I'm not even getting into the other positions. I just don't care. We have seen Kyle McCord play college football games. We actually saw him start a game. Now it was against Akron, but we've seen him step on the field and play football. He's a good football player, and he's going to have the best receiving core in college football playing for him. And in those games, you're not playing with your entire starting offensive lineup. Right. That's another factor, too. Whereas Sam Hartman's played so many games, he's going to be able to make that smooth transition. Right. I get that a lot of people are looking at Ohio State and they're saying, well, they're not going to be good because of this, and this, and all that. And I'm like, I get it. And I don't know how good Ohio State's going to be this year, but it's a spring game. There have been years where Notre Dame's had pretty good teams where in the spring, their offensive line didn't look great because they weren't quite a unit yet. And they were still trying to figure some things out. Ohio State's going to be just fine. And do I expect them to be as good on offense? Well, it depends. I actually think Ohio State isn't going to be as explosive on offense this year, but you know what? I think they're going to be a lot more this year, Ryan. Versatile.
Efficient.
Efficient. They were pretty efficient throwing the football.
Yeah.
Versatile. And what would happen is if you could slow down Ohio State's pass game, you could beat them. And I think that's what has hurt them in recent years. So you get into those really bad weather games. The fact that Ohio State fans were making excuses for it was bad weather is like, have you not watched this rivalry the last 100 freaking years?
Yeah.
If you have built a team to where bad weather hurts you for a team that plays its home games in Ohio and who plays its road games in often north of Ohio, that's a you problem.
Yeah. Yep.
That's a you problem. You didn't build your team correctly. And so I think this team, by its very nature, is going to have to be more balanced. And a more balanced Ohio State, in my opinion, is a better Ohio State because now you're not putting as big of a burden on your defense as they have in recent years. So does that mean they're going to be a championship caliber team? No, I'm not saying that at all. I still like Notre Dame in that matchup as of right now, but I don't think Ohio State's going to be this take a step back that people think they're going to look different.
Yes.
But different doesn't always equal, because here's the thing. You needed Herculean effort from C.J. Stroud last year because you had no run game. You had no balance outside of that. Once your top receiver went out, you needed him to be Superman. They're not going to need Kyle McCord to be Superman if they do this right. They're going to be healthier at running back. Not only is Mayan and Travion going to be healthier, you get Evan Pryor back from his knee injury. And you have Dallin Hayden's not going to be a sophomore. So they're going to be able to rely on their run game a lot more this year. So you won't need Kyle McCord to be C.J. Stroud. And I think that's what a lot of fans are missing, is they think, well, Kyle McCord's not going to be C.J. Stroud. If Ohio State's smart, they're not going to ask him to. And I think it'll make him a more balanced team, a more consistent team, in my opinion. I could be wrong on that, Ryan. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm a little in between on it, to be honest, because if it was just simply, and this isn't a Kyle McCord criticism at all, but if it was just Kyle McCord and everything else around you was like just good, you're good to go. Because they do have a great wide receiver crew, but they have injuries at running back. They have an offensive line that they're shuffling around and they're not really sure what they're going to have up front. I think that things are going to be forced into, like, Kyle's going to have to play really good ball, right? And I think there's going to be some forced issues with there, right? Like, I feel like teams are really going to try to pressure him a lot because the offensive line is just going to be a major question mark early on. But I think that they will be able to remedy that quickly, because it's about meshing together well, right? Like, I mean, right now, because the spring reaction for me, Wicked, is like that offensive line's terrible. But also, you have a few months to figure that out, right? Like, you have a few months to mesh that.
And you didn't have all 5 projected starters on one offensive line. That's the other thing that I think that people need to think about. Ryan, I care so little about using spring games to project you forward.
Oh, I agree with that.
I agree with that. And people make way too much of it. And we just have so much evidence of it just not mattering all that much. Now, I think the thing I take away from the spring game is, I wonder if Ryan Day has learned his lessons yet. That, dude, you can't just talk about wanting to be more physical. You have to actually be more physical. And you're going into spring games saying no tackling. And it's just like, I'm not a big fan of that. I'm really not a big fan of that. But we'll see how it plays out in the fall.
We shall.
All right, here we go.
David Lowe says, what do y'all think would lead to the title more? Audric Estime with 1,500 rushing yards, or any receiver with 1,000 receiving yards?
I'd say the receiver with 1,000 yards.
Yeah,
I think Notre Dame could be 8-4 and Audric rushes for 1,500 yards.
It's possible. Yeah.
I mean, the 2 starting running backs last year, actually your top 3 running backs last year rushed for over 2,100 yards, Ryan. And so,
also things behind Audric probably weren't great if he had to run for 1,500 yards, right? Maybe Jadarian didn't get back fully healthy. Maybe Jeremiah Love wasn't quite ready. Like, I think there's a lot of question marks if the former hits there, but if the latter hits there, I have confidence in Notre Dame is going to be able to run the ball very well this year. So if you had a 1,000-yard receiver and you just have a potent passing attack, I'm like, dang, man, this offense is going to be really good if that's the scenario that we have.
Agree, because Audric going for 15 doesn't mean that the receiving core is going to be good. If the receiving core goes off, I have no doubt the run game is still going to be good.
Right. And that might mean if it's the former, that would also mean that maybe you weren't able to throw the ball at all. Really. Like, you were just like, man, we got to grind stuff out because this is not what we thought it was going to be.
Right.
Next question from Carlos Garzat. I'm sure I'm wrong, but I feel like USC relies heavily on the transfer portal instead of recruiting. You are correct. Can you realistically build a program like that? P.S. I'm an Irish fan all the way.
I have my doubts because we haven't seen it, right? I mean, we haven't seen it to me at all, as far as to me relying to winning a championship. I mean, Georgia has barely touched the transfer portal. They've lost more than they've added. They've barely touched the transfer portal. Ohio State's barely touched the transfer portal. I mean, they'll fill a hole here. Hey, we got to fill a hole at left tackle. Let's go get a left tackle. We need to add a little depth in the tackle. We need a nickel. Let's go get a nickel. They're not loading up with transfer team players. Ohio State or Alabama dipped into the portal hard last year, and I think Nick Saban's probably regretting that a little bit because some of the headaches that some of the guys that came over from the portal have. The teams that are competing for championships in the last 2 years are not teams that loaded up on portals. Now, we've seen teams have quick turnarounds with the portal, Michigan State, USC, But with Michigan State, we also saw them absolutely collapse the next year, right?
100%.
Because they couldn't do it again. USC,
Not
we'll find
sustainable.
out. I mean, look, now, my thing is, did USC win because last year because they went and got 25 portal guys, or did they win last year because they got Caleb Williams? Right? I mean, that's my thing. Like, did Jordan Addison really make their offense better than Mario Williams? They were already loaded at receiver. They still would have put up similar numbers if they didn't get all those receivers. So, that's my question is, can you build a team that way? We don't have evidence that you can build a team that way and win a championship. We don't know that yet. Now, we do know that you can turn it around and win. I guess that would be my objective. And I would say if you're smart and you're like Lincoln Riley, you use the portal your first 2 years, then start really ramping up your high school recruiting. It doesn't look like he's necessarily doing that. I mean, it still looks like they're going to rely heavily on the portal when you look at what they're doing in their current recruiting class, Ryan. So I don't know if he plans on changing that. I think he plans on just getting some top level high school kids like the kids they got last year, Deuce Robinson, and they got the Branch kid who's really good. But you look at their 24 class, they have 3 kids committed in their 2024 class. That's it. Not a single lineman, not a single 2 receivers and a running back. That's it. That's all they got. So
and they had Jason Robinson, but obviously he committed from them. So also another wide receiver. To your point.
So I just don't know that you can really have that kind of continuity there. I mean, because we asked, what were we asked the other day, right? What's USC's record last year if they got all those portal guys except for one, Caleb Williams?
Yeah,
I don't think they're that good. They're 6-6, 7-5, 8-4 at best, but they're not a win over Utah away from being in the playoff. I strongly believe in, right?
Yeah.
And so, but if any team's going to do it, it's going to be USC because it's such a unique situation. It really is. I just still feel like the portal has to be, to win a championship, the portal has to be, let's go out and find that impact player or 2 or fill a hole or 2, but you're still building a program from high school because that's how the continuity, the unity, the culture of your program is established. Yep. And I think that more than anything is Lincoln Riley's biggest failure, is his biggest failure at Oklahoma. I don't think he has ever understood the importance of building a culture in your football program. He has always just been about acquisition of talent and scheme. And it's never been about the culture, which is why I would argue they have had defenses with a good amount of NFL talent be terrible under Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma. Why? Because your culture is a problem. It's not that your talent's the problem. Like, how many years have we seen them? What was his last year, Ryan? Didn't they have like 6 kids get drafted from that defense?
Something like that.
They were awful. So is that really a talent problem or a culture problem?
Oh,
it's a culture problem.
Yeah, and it's also keeping Alex Grinch for whatever problem as well.
But that's part of it though, right? Sure. I mean, Alex Grinch had some pretty good defenses at Washington State. So my question is, Alex Grinch did nothing different at Oklahoma than the previous defensive coordinators did at Oklahoma. I'm not a big Alex Grinch fan. He didn't do very well at Ohio State either. My point, however, is he really that bad, or is that's just kind of what it's always going to be if you're a defensive coordinator for Lincoln Riley? But also if you were someone who valued the culture and the defense in that way, then you wouldn't have him as long as you've had him. If he is that bad, that's the other part of it, Sure. So, but that's where I think he's going to be I don't know if he's a guy that he's going to have to change if he's going to want to win a championship. I'm not saying he's not capable of it. His offensive mind is capable of winning a championship. Is he capable of winning as a head coach? That's a much different question. Sure. Much different question.
Yeah, and I think that the sustainability is always what I come back to with this type of question. I don't think you're going to consistently year in and year out be that team that can compete for championships and that can continuously win 10 plus games, compete for a conference championship. Like I don't think that. I think similarly to the NFL free agency structure of it can hit well for a year, but then what's going to happen the next year? What's happened when there's so much turnover and turmoil and all that great stuff. So I think the sustainability is just never going to be there in that structure. I agree with that.
Agree.
Next question from Wicked Bronco Productions.
More of a comment in the super chat. Yeah.
Thank you again for the super chat. It says, it just makes me laugh hearing them call Kyle McCord a top 5 quarterback in college football already because he threw for 6 touchdowns against Akron. Could he be good? Yes. But Ohio State fans saying he's better than Stroud is delusional. Pine would have 6 touchdowns versus Akron. Oh, people are saying
are there actually people saying that? Like, I've literally never heard.
Archer, we need you, man.
Yeah.
We know you're on like Ohio State message boards and stuff. Are there people
and
saying
we know
this?
that you'll call Ohio State fans out. Are there actually people saying this? Like, other than Twitter? Because, I mean, look, guys, if we were to use Twitter, things that Notre Dame fans say on Twitter, if we took all the stupid things that some Notre Dame fans say on Twitter, it would make all of us look really bad. Like, really bad. So I maybe there's a couple people on Twitter, but I've never heard that. I've never heard anyone that I know that follows Ohio State say that he's better than CJ Stroud. And the whole thing about Pine would throw 6 touchdowns against Akron, bro, Drew Pine lost at home to Stanford. So no. Not Drew Pine lost. Notre Dame's team with Drew Pine at quarterback lost at home to Stanford. So no, he wouldn't have thrown for 6 touchdowns against Akron. But I haven't heard anybody say that, honestly. And if they are saying that, that's crazy. But I honestly haven't heard anybody say that. And I've never heard anyone say he's going to be a top 5 quarterback either.
The most I've heard about the Kyle McCord, Devin Brown stuff is that I think Ohio State fans are pretty confident that they'll get production out of the quarterback position because they always have. So
whoever their quarterback is going to be is going to throw for a lot of yards and a lot of touchdowns. Yes. Will he be good? Will it be result in winning? I don't know. But he's going to put up numbers. And Kyle McCord is a top 100 recruit. Devin Brown's a top 100 recruit. These aren't bums. I don't think they're going to be as good as CJ Stroud, but if Ohio State's coaches are smart, they won't ask him to be, and that's going to be the difference.
Should look different.
So we'll see how that goes, but I literally have not heard that. It'd be kind of interesting if it was, but I haven't heard that.
Next question's from Irish Burnt Ends 84. Burnt ends are great, by the way. Any chance we take all 3 remaining Viper targets, Elijah Rushing, Malachi Williams, Logan Thomas, if they all wanted to commit? I get that it's not likely, but we can dream, can't we?
I'd have a hard time taking all 3.
You can dream.
Because now that gets you up to 7 defensive linemen, and I think that's too much in the class. Especially since it's all at one position. Like, so
3
you've
Vipers,
got like if you got, let's say you had Cole Mullins, Bryce Young, Elijah Rushing, and Logan Thomas, and then let's say you had a commitment from like Owen Wafel, and let's just say Brandon Davis Swain was still in the class, and you kind of viewed him as a 3 technique, right? I'm going to 7 because I'm taking Justin Scott, right?
Right.
But I've balanced my class out. I've now got 4 ends and 3 interior guys. But the way that to get to those 3, you'd have to have 5 ends in one class. And that's too many. And to me, that's bad roster management. Now, I understand people say, you take them and you figure it out. I know that, I'll say it again. I know that's easy to say, but it's not practical. It's not practical. You have to have some semblance of, there comes a point in time where we're overdoing it at a position, and it doesn't help us. And that would be that. But man, it'd be hard. It'd be hard to tell any of those kids no, Ryan. Any of them.
It would be.
But at some point in time, you kind of have to. I think if it was going to happen, though, it would be because Thomas and Williams want to come first. And they say yes, and then Rushing decides he wants to come later. That would be the only way it can happen.
Man.
But I don't see it. I just don't.
But yes, you're allowed to dream. You can dream.
Yeah. And this is the great time for it, honestly. I mean, that's the fun about it. It's the fun. And I don't find having the conversation. I'm just saying practically it's just not really smart. But God, who do you tell no to at that point in time? I mean, come on. It'd be tough.
Yeah. Next question from John Mayernich. Does Notre Dame go to the portal next season for a quarterback again? Next year, he will have 3 quarterbacks with 0 experience.
Okay. Ohio State won a lot of games with a guy that started with 0 experience. I mean, look, I get it, right? First of all, he won't have 3 quarterbacks with 0 experience because somebody's going to play snaps, right? How much experience did Bryce Young have going into the next year? And again, okay, I get it. Those are big-time players, but Notre Dame's going to have a couple big-time players. It just depends on how those guys progress, honestly, Ryan. I mean, how does Kenny Minchie and Steve Angeli progress during the season? And I think Kenny Minchie is going to be the one that determines this question. I think Kenny Minchie and because if Steve Angeli, I just have not heard anything that makes me or seen anything that makes me believe that if Steve Angeli has a good year, that all of a sudden there's just this belief that he's going to be the guy. I don't see it. I could be wrong. I hope I am wrong. I just don't see it. I think Kenny Minchie really taking a big step this year and saying between him and Angeli and CJ Carr, we feel good about it. I think that's going to have a big impact on what they do. The other part of it too, Ryan, is who's in the portal.
Right.
Because there may be some guys in the portal you're like, yeah, I love Kenny Minchie, but how do I say no to that?
It's probably always going to happen too, right? Like there's probably going to be a couple guys that you're like, yeah, guy's pretty good, man. Guy's pretty good. I mean,
and most of those guys won't be interested in Notre Dame, but if let's just say that there is that guy that jumps in the portal,
another Sam Hartman type, like
or a Drake May, let's say Drew Aller has a lights out year and decides I've always wanted to be at Notre Dame. Who knows, man? I mean, it just there's so much to go into it, but it's just too early to know for sure. But it just, again, for Notre Dame, if Kenny Minchie has a really good year development wise, then I think you could feel better about not going into the portal for a starter. Yep. I think at that point in time, it'd be going to the portal more for depth at that point in time. Because I do think there's a need for a veteran who is okay not being the guy next year.
Sure.
And then the other part of it is, how does CJ look as a senior? Right? I mean, that's the other part of it, is does he improve his game to the point where you're like, okay, we think he can help us as a freshman? That's a part of it as well. But Kenny Minchie's going to be the key, in my opinion.
I agree. Next question is from Ray Holcraft. It says, how good is Mario Williams out of USC? Talented.
He's athletic. He's athletic. I mean, I think Mario's still learning how to be a wide receiver. He's very talented. He's fast. He's quick. He's got some Hollywood. He's got some Hollywood Brown in his game.
Yeah.
He's just not a natural pass catcher like the way that I thought he would be. And he just, I think they're having a hard time finding that fit, but he's going to have a shot to break out at some point in time, Ryan. I mean, I do. I wonder if Lincoln Riley's going to have the patience for it, but it wouldn't shock me if he's their number 1 or number 2 receiver this year at USC.
Him and Dorian Springer or whatever.
Yeah. It wouldn't shock me. He's talented. He's athletic, talented. He just hasn't put it all together yet. That's what I would say.
Yeah, he didn't take the jump as a sophomore that I thought he was going to in year 1 at USC, but we shall see.
Agree. We got a 2-parter here, Ryan.
Dan V says, what are your thoughts on some of the kids that Joe Rudolph is recruiting? I saw Gerby Lambert scheduled an official, but outside of that, there seems to be an emphasis on lower-ranked recruits. Is that him just expanding the board, or is there a cause to be concerned?
Well, I don't have a cause to be concerned yet, Ryan, but I'm not going to act like I'm completely confident and comfortable with everything that we've seen on the offensive line.
Sure.
But there's a couple things that factor into it why I'm not overly concerned yet. Number one is there just aren't a lot of really good offensive linemen in the country this year. And when there are so few, then the ones that are really good are going to be highly coveted because there's a shortage, right? It's supply and demand. It's the same supply and demand that people should understand in economics is also true in recruiting. If 20 teams need a big-time quarterback, but there's only 5 big-time quarterbacks, guess what? They're going to get into a bidding war, and
15 teams aren't going to get a good quarterback.
Exactly. And so that's part of it this year for me, Ryan, is and it's not a great offensive line year in sort of traditionally pro Notre Dame areas. Like, I'm not a big Kevin Haywood fan. I'm okay Notre Dame not pushing for him. But I mean, Grant Briggs is a pretty highly ranked guy. They're after him.
Yes.
So he's a guy that I would say is not. I would say outside of Lambert, I think he's another highly ranked guy. Peter Jones was highly ranked until he committed to Notre Dame, but Rivals even still has him in the top 100.
Yeah.
So I think the Anthony Knapp thing is just about Joe Rudolph worked the kid out multiple times in person at camps and fell in love with him I don't think that. Go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, and also I think a part of that, because I think we're always going to link Anthony Knapp and Caleb Brewer together a little bit,
Sure.
But you do have to remember, Dan, in this scenario, to your question, Caleb Brewer is not a very highly ranked football player either.
Anthony Knapp's ranked higher.
Yeah.
Anthony Knapp is actually ranked higher than Caleb Brewer because there's one recruiting service that has Anthony Knapp ranked really high, and that's On Three. They have him as the number 205 player in the country. Now everybody else has him as a 3-star, and I have him as a 3.5 star. And that ranking would be a 3-star, where I have him would be a 3-star if I was on the same system as the other recruiting services. But I mean, nobody has Caleb Brewer as a 4-star, so you can't really say that. It's a good point, Ryan. But I mean, look, if you get Grant Bricks and Peter Jones and Anthony Knapp in your recruiting class, you've got 2 guys that I believe are ranked as top 100 recruits by at least one recruiting service. Correct? Yep. Bricks is ranked in the top 100 by On3 and ESPN. So, I think what you're seeing is they're out visiting a lot of underranked linemen because they're doing their due diligence more than anything. But you look at the 25 class, Ryan, there's a lot of very highly ranked and highly regarded linemen that have offers right now that they're going. Owen Strebig's a guy. They're going. I don't know what his ranking is now, but it better be high. They're going after him. I believe Avery Gack, I would assume, is a highly ranked guy. I don't know what his ranking, because I'm looking at now. He's consistent. Everybody has him in the top 250. I'm curious what Owen Strebig's ranking is, because it should be very high.
I think he was a 4-star, but at least a couple.
So. On3 has him number 47. Everyone has him as a 4-star. Rivals doesn't have him in the top 250, but he's 47 on On3, 133 on 247, 120 on ESPN. He's a top 100 player for me, Ryan. That kid's flat out a top 100 player.
He's a massive man. He's a massive kid.
So I just think what's happening is it's the combination of, this is the first year of Joe Rudolph being here, and he just happens to be here in a year where it's not a good line year. So they got to offer some kids that maybe are under the radar kids. And so then it's like, is this all he's doing? And there's that concern. But in reality, it's like, there aren't a whole lot of guys to offer that are big time guys that don't want money.
Right.
And that's where you're at. So it's more bad timing, I would say, than me necessarily being overly concerned, because he recruited some highly ranked guys to Wisconsin. He fought like a dog to get Billy Stroud. You know what I mean? He got Logan Brown from Illinois, Nolan Rucci from Pennsylvania, who's a top 100 guy. He didn't just get projects.
Guy.
Right. Yeah. He didn't just get projects at Wisconsin and turn them into, all big time players. He went after some big time players. He just didn't always land them all because it's still Wisconsin. And so, but I mean, they had 3 top 250 kids in Wisconsin the year before, and they lost on 2 of them. But it's not because he didn't want them. They had a bad year, and then he got let go, and Notre Dame and Ohio State out recruited him. But I just think it's bad timing. Dan, it's a very fair question, because I see what you see. I just think in context, it doesn't worry me yet.
Yeah.
I'm worried about his ability to close, Ryan, but I'm not worried about, whether or not he can identify guys and go after top guys, because that's what we're seeing him do in the 25 class so far.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to your point, if he ends up with Gerby Lambert and Grant Bricks to go along with Peter Jones and Anthony Knapp, you're like, that's good.
Sure.
It's a good class.
In this year, and because the thing is,
class for this year.
We have been saying this for months. We have been saying this when Harry Heastan was the O-line coach, that this is not a good year on offensive line, which is, if Gearby decides to commit that weekend and no other linemen are committed, it would not shock me completely if Notre Dame just shut it down and said, we're taking 3. Right now, I think they really like Grant Briggs, so I think they would still probably take him, but he's a top 100 kid, so it's just not a good offensive line year, especially at tackle. It's really a thin year in offensive tackle. So really, some of the better guys out there, Ryan, are projects that I like. There's been a couple guys I've looked at where I'm like, this kid got some ceiling, but he is a question mark. There's a lot of that in this year's class. There's just not a lot of Monroe Freeling, Samson Okunlolas, Charles Jagasaws in this class. There just aren't many of them. There really aren't. Last year was a great tackle class, really good tackle class.
And luckily, you got arguably the best one last year. So, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Ryan, let's get to a few more of these here.
Next question is from Matt McCarthy, who says, are you worried that Ohio State has the final official visit for Kingston? The same thing happened with Jason Moore last year. Do you think that helped Ohio State, or did Al Washington just not close on Jason Moore?
Al Washington didn't close on Jason Moore. I mean, we've seen this hurt Notre Dame before. I mean, Nick Singleton, I think his last visit being at Penn State hurt Notre Dame with him, but we've seen other times where it didn't matter. I think with Kingston, Ryan, he's been to both of these schools so much that I don't think a visit is going to if he's decided Notre Dame is where he wants to be, I don't think a visit at Ohio State's going to matter, nor would it be reversed if Notre Dame had the last visit and he just Ohio State's where he wanted to be. Yeah. It's like I've seen people say, well, Dallin Hayden went to Ohio State after Notre Dame. Well, what happened there was not that they had the last visit. He was all set to go to Notre Dame. And then the Notre Dame position coach at the time started bad-mouthing Tony Alford, not knowing that the family loved Tony Alford. He was still going to pick your school over Ohio State, but the only reason they really liked Ohio State is they had a great relationship with Tony Alford. And he starts bad-mouthing Tony Alford. And it was like, I don't play for some guy that's good. Because Tony Alford has never bad-mouthed Notre Dame. So it's like, well, I'm going to play for that. That was the thing that kind of swayed it in the opposite direction. So to me, you've been on these kids so long that I don't think a final visit, the timing of the visit is going to have a big impact. I really don't think. And there's been a bunch of kids that we've seen that Notre Dame was not their last visit and they still got them. It's about the relationship going in.
And I also think it's very dependent on the kid as well, right? Like there's some kids that are impulsive that the last visit, like, oh man, that was amazing, I'm going to commit, right? But then there's other kids, and I think Kingston's like this. Kingston is incredibly thorough, well thought out, and not incredibly emotional. Like he's not. Yep. Like he's one of those kids that is just trying to find the best fit for him. So I wouldn't even expect him to make an impulse decision like a day or two after his official visit. Like I would imagine like a full week of just let's sit down and let's talk with the family and everybody around you, the support system. He just doesn't seem like an impulsive kid to me in any way.
Agree. It would surprise me if he picked. Now, does that mean he's going to pick Notre Dame over Ohio State? I'm not saying that.
That's not what that means.
If he picks Ohio State, I don't think it'll be because of the timing of the visit. It'll be because Ohio State made a better final pitch.
Yes.
That's down the stretch and on the visit. It'll be that, not the timing.
Agree.
In my opinion.
Next question is from Katie Keevers. Says, how do you take the portal safety into account recruiting-wise since he has multiple years left?
It doesn't matter at all. It doesn't change my numbers factor at all. The only thing it changes from a standpoint, Katie, is there's not as much of a need of a guy that's coming to play right away.
Yeah.
But here's a couple things about the transfer. Now, again, we don't know that he's going to pick Notre Dame. Right now, Notre Dame's got work to do because there's other schools that he has higher on their board. All right, Ryan, you've mentioned this.
Yes.
The other thing, too, is Notre Dame's recruiting him to play a position he hasn't played before. So two parts about that. Number one is, are they able to convince him of that? And number two, is he going to be good at safety? We don't necessarily know the answer to that. I like what I see on film of him projecting to safety. I think he'd fit well there, but we don't know. But also, you also take into account, he'll be a senior with a potential for a fifth year, correct, Ryan? You're not recruiting to replace
sixth year, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. So he'll be a fifth with potential for a sixth then?
I believe so. Yeah.
Meaning, to me, you don't necessarily recruit you're not recruiting to replace seniors. You're recruiting to replace juniors and younger. Like that's how you're factoring in your depth chart. So it doesn't affect it all numbers wise. It just gives you maybe a little bit of leeway on if you don't get a higher floor guy that's ready to play right away. It doesn't crush you as long as you get high ceiling guys. But it doesn't. Big picture, that's a small thing. Big picture, it shouldn't change their safety thoughts at all. They need to be hammering for the best players they can get. And it wouldn't even necessarily, it might make me say, maybe I don't go to 4, right? If he does since he does have multiple years, but you still need to get to the 3 for sure, in my view.
No doubt. Next question is from Antoine Porsche Rideau.
Yeah, there you go.
Porsche Rideau. Brian, would Notre Dame need to get us at safety if we get a commitment from the safety visiting today? So
that kind of fills into it.
Yeah.
It doesn't change anything for me. Again, Notre Dame's got a lot of work to do on that one, but it doesn't change anything for me at all in those areas we just discussed.
Next question is from Beef Eater ND08, aka Toe Jam 1992. Hello, IB family. If Notre Dame and USC are both undefeated when they meet and Notre Dame wins, does Caleb Williams still win the Heisman or does Hartman become the favorites?
Well, if I'm going to be consistent, right? I think the Heisman Trophy should not be who the best quarterback or offensive skill guy on the best team. That's not what it should be. To me, if the best player in college football is on a 6-6 team, he should be the Heisman Trophy winner. And that's how I feel it should be, right? And so if I'm going to be consistent, what I believe to be what the Heisman Trophy should be about, the most outstanding player. And if Caleb Williams is still the better player than Sam Hartman, even if Sam Hartman's team and Sam Hartman plays a big role in the team winning, but Caleb Williams is still the better quarterback, then I'm still giving Caleb the Heisman at that point in time. If that's what it comes down to, if it's those two guys. Yeah. Where it would have a big impact for me is if Caleb just plays terrible that game and Sam lights the world on fire, then that could have a big say. Right? Like, hey, you went into Notre Dame Stadium and laid an egg. Okay, right. Well, maybe you're not the most outstanding player if you're doing that, right? I mean, that's the other part of it too. But I'm a believer that the Heisman Trophy is awarded to the most outstanding player over the course of based on what he did over the course of an entire season, not what he happened to do in a late October in South Bend. Now, that's going to get a little extra weight because the most outstanding player needs to be at his best in the big games. And so that'll factor into it a little bit. But overall, Ryan, that kind of thing is it only sways me if it's neck and neck.
Yeah.
In this case, cause especially if USC is undefeated at that point in time. I mean, Caleb Williams is having a pretty good year. But the other part of it too is after that USC game, Notre Dame has Clemson, and that's about it as far as money games. Whereas that's when USC's schedule starts getting tougher. So Caleb's going to have a lot more money games to say. So I think that the Heisman Trophy will be more determined, in my opinion, Ryan, by what those two teams do after that. So let's say Notre Dame wins, and let's say Notre Dame wins by 10. Okay. Caleb plays okay, doesn't light the world on fire because Notre Dame's defense is just really harassing them, getting after it. And then Sam lights a crappy USC defense up. Let's say that happens. All right, so okay, maybe Sam, who also played great against Ohio State, maybe he's the leader now.
A leader, yeah.
Right? But coming out of that, you'd have a bye week, Pitt at Clemson, bye week, Wake Forest at Stanford. There's not a lot of games where he's going to go out there and prove his worth after that. And let's be honest, human beings are emotional people who react to what they've seen most recently. Let's just be honest. How many times have you heard people who actually are paid to give their opinion say, well, that happened back in September, like it was 3 years ago. You know what I mean? Like it's not even part of the same season. I was way back in September, and whereas USC coming out of that Notre Dame game, they've got to play Utah, Washington, Oregon, UCLA, and then a rematch if they win out against either Oregon or somebody else. So you're going to have a lot more money games for him coming out of that. So I would then say, well, Sam Hartman's chances at winning the Heisman Trophy come down to he's got to light up Clemson at that point in time, right? Now, if he goes out and lights up Clemson, then sure, yeah, now we're talking. But it would be more about that than it would be what he did against Caleb Williams. The Caleb Williams thing would be like the thing that gets him in that number one spot. It would be the Clemson game that determines it. Right, for me.
I hope we're having this conversation at some point.
It'd be fun, right?
I hope we're having
it'd be a lot of fun. I don't see Caleb Williams winning the Heisman though this year. It's hard to repeat because now everybody's picking your game apart.
Archie Griffin's still the only guy that ever did that, right?
Yeah,
isn't he
back in the 70s?
Repeat?
Yeah. Back in the, and I mean, and you think Tim Tebow had like 2 cracks at it, didn't he?
I think
after he won it in 07 and didn't get it.
Yep.
So it's hard to do, man. It really is. And what does Drake May do? I mean, there's going to be guys in the Heisman Trophy consideration this year that no one's ever even like thought of right now. That's just kind of how it is every year. And who thought going in November Drake May was going to be in that conversation a year ago? Like, it just kind of the way it is. But I hope we are having that conversation going into Clemson. What does Sam Hartman need to do this weekend to secure his Heisman Trophy standing? That'd be a lot of fun.
It's been a little while since we've had some Heisman conversation, man. You remember like the Josh Adams
33 trucking
caps they had and everything. But
and then he didn't do much after that.
He did not. He did not. The truck stopped
didn't.
After that one.
The
truck stopped.
Yeah.
Next question from Conrad. It says, does Mitchell Evans have a chance to be on the top 10 list of tight ends by the end of the year?
Sure. And we forgot to talk
Yeah.
about that, Ryan. We forgot to talk about that during the show because we were starting to get a little close on. I was like, man, we got to hurry up and get out of here. He has a chance, and so does Holden Stace, in my opinion. It just kind of depends on who that number one guy emerges from a production standpoint. Right now, I would predict that to be Mitchell, as long as he's healthy. The conversation Ryan and I had beforehand was one of three things is going to happen, right? A, Mitchell builds on what he did at the end of the bowl game and becomes number one guy, and the number one guy at Notre Dame is going to catch a lot of balls, and Sam Hartman's going to realize, like, hey, I like throwing to tight ends, and we don't know if he does or not yet because he really didn't have a tight end in the bowl game, in the spring game, but he did make a really nice backside throw to Davis Sherwood. So I was like, okay, maybe he's going to like that. Number two is Holden Stace becomes that guy, and he's the one that we're talking about. Or number three, they're both pretty good, and then that split production keeps keeps them both out of the top 10 tight end conversation. I could see that as well, but it would make it for a much better team at that point in time. So
yes, it would.
But does he have a chance to be on there? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Can't put him on there now. He had 3 catches last year and they were all in the bowl game, but yeah, he's a guy to have my eye on for sure. My concern with him would be the same. And we didn't get to this at receiver, cause we were going to get into this, but man, we were going really long on time. Who's the Notre Dame guy receiver that could be that conversation? And to me, it's Jaden Thomas and Tobias Merriweather. None of them belong in the conversation now, but who could it be? I think it could be Jaden Thomas from a consistency, dependability, volume standpoint, or Tobias because he makes a bunch of big plays. He has 40 catches for 800 yards or something like that, right? I mean, I could see something like that. Those are the two guys that I think are receiver. But the other part of it too, Ryan, is if the ball gets spread around like you and I think it will this year based on A, the offense that they're running, B, RPO-based offenses tend to spread the ball around a little bit more, and then C, just Sam Hartman has a history of spreading the ball around.
Yep.
It could be hard for a tight end to get enough production to be in that conversation just because the other receivers are going to be getting so much attention as well. So it'll be interesting. But yes, Mitchell will certainly have a shot. This is a follow-up from that thing that we just said too, Ryan. He said, fighting Mike 87 said, if Williams wants a second Heisman, he's going to have USC at 12-0. Those voters just won't vote for the same guy to win twice. I don't know how much Ohio State pays to protect Griffin, but it's been enough. I mean, look, if he's the best guy, he should win it again. Right. I mean, I agree with that. I don't care if you're the most outstanding player for 3 years in a row, you should win it 3 years in a row. I mean, just the reality of it. But yes, you're correct. I mean, I don't know if he has to have them at 12-0, but they got to be in that conversation, and he's going to have to be really good because they're going to pick his game apart.
Numbers. Yeah.
I mean, they're going to pick his game apart big time this year.
Definitely are. Yeah.
And there's no doubt. And they'll find reasons to not like them, and they do it every year. It just drives me nuts, but it'll happen. It'll happen.
Oh yeah, people hold everything against everybody nowadays. It's like even if he
always
doesn't have any of the shenanigans, but like, hey man, you remember last year when he painted his fingernails?
Right, exactly.
Last year, man.
We know we didn't hold it against him for last year's Heisman Trophy, but we're going to hold him against him for this year's Heisman. Yeah, I could see that.
Makes a lot of
It's
sense.
a joke.
Makes a lot of sense.
It's an absolute joke, but I could see it.
From Andre Tonso says, do you believe that that Power 5 conferences are too top heavy, i.e. SEC, Alabama, and Georgia?
I will say this. I think they're too top heavy for too long a period of time. Conferences have always been top heavy, Ryan. I mean, there's never really been a time where there's like 7 great teams in a conference. Even when the people said the SEC was that way, it wasn't. There's always been 2 to 3 at the top. What was different when I was younger, and this is how I felt, and I could be wrong on this, but I felt like the dynasties in a conference didn't last as long, right? Like it wasn't one team dominating a league year after year, or one team dominating, 2 teams dominating a league year after year. Like growing up, Ohio State and Michigan were almost always good, but there's always some other team that was popping up to knock them off. And Michigan State would have some really good years. Purdue would jump in there with some really good years. Then Wisconsin comes along and they had some really good years. But it was always sort of Michigan and Ohio State were always in the top of the conversation, right? And so I think that there was always a little bit of that, in my opinion. Again, it's just the length is the issue that I have nowadays. And the other thing that I have that bothers me a little bit more now than it used to is just there's no middle as much as in some of these leagues, like the ACC. It's like Clemson, and then there's no like next tier. There's like Clemson, empty space. Then we get to some other teams. What's going on in the ACC too long? But I mean, look, the SEC, for example, you say Alabama, Georgia, but the Georgia thing's new.
It is.
I mean, that's the last couple years. They had that one good year in 2017, and then like the next year, they weren't a playoff team. And then in 2019, they lost to South Carolina. It was like 4-8, right? I mean, it's the last 2 years. Bama's the only one that's been consistently good all the time. You had Ole Miss had a couple years where they popped up, right? With Hugh Freeze. They beat Bama 2 years in a row. Earlier in the decade, South Carolina was the best team in the East for like 3 out of 4 years. If you remember, that was Spurrier. Missouri had a really good year. Remember, Missouri played the SEC East Championship one year with Gary Pinkel when they first came over. Yep. We've seen LSU we've seen Auburn win the West a couple times. We've seen LSU win the West. We've seen, so we've seen some of that. It's just Alabama's dominated in national championships, but they've not played in one of the years they won a championship, 2017, Ryan, they didn't even play in the flipping conference championship game. Right. So you can't say that they dominated the SEC that year. They didn't. So, but yeah, I would say it's always been too top heavy. I just think there's less middle now, which is what kind of bothers me, Ryan, is there's just, and the rules now are so much more geared towards those top teams now, just with the way that it's the transfer portal. I mean, you're not seeing starters from Alabama leaving to go to Vanderbilt for more playing time. You're seeing kids from Vanderbilt leaving to go to Alabama. I mean, it's
going to make the strong stronger. It's going to make the rich richer, to your point.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's exactly what it's done. Jahmyr Gibbs goes to Georgia Tech, leaves to go to Alabama. I mean, it's not the other way around, right? The guys that are leaving Alabama to go to Georgia Tech are the guys that those teams didn't want anymore.
Right.
Or they were buried in the depth chart. Right, like who's the kid from Georgia? Who's the kid that just committed to Georgia Tech as a transfer? I think, oh shoot, give me a second. Just happened yesterday. I forget who it was. Just
from
give
Alabama?
me 1 second. No, it's from another school. I don't think it was from Alabama. I thought it was a kid from Georgia, but Dominic Blaylock.
Oh yeah, the injury kid.
Right, exactly. Because he had been injured and kind of gotten passed up. It wasn't like he was their number 2 receiver last year and he leaves to go to Georgia Tech. Mitchell leaves to go to Texas, another big-time program. And so it's definitely a rich get richer type of situation. There's no doubt.
Wait, next question from Matt Philippi. Said, if we had to lose just one game, which of the big 3 games would you want to lose? Ohio State, USC, or Clemson? Be Clemson for me, Zach, because we've kind of slayed that dragon a little bit. You haven't beaten USC with Lincoln Riley yet, and you have not beaten Ohio State. So you got to you already slayed the Clemson dragon, in my opinion.
Yeah. Ryan, that's a really interesting one because there's 2 ways to look at this. Number one is exactly what you said, and you're spot on. Like, you need to slay that dragon, and I think you nailed it. I love that analogy. But then you say, okay, but if we're talking about the college football playoff, would it be better to lose to Ohio State than beat USC and beat Clemson because of the lateness of it? That would be the thing that I would like, because I could see Notre Dame beating Ohio State and then them losing to Clemson, and then the committee in ESPN using that as like I know that you guys beat Ohio State, but that was all the way back in September.
Right.
Recently they beat up Penn State, they beat Michigan, they'd probably beat you now. That kind. You know how that nonsense goes. So that's kind of my concern. So like, if you're just talking about the timing of it, you'd almost say Ohio State or USC would be the better one to lose, because then you could get the big wins afterwards. But you could then spin it. Well, if you beat USC and Clemson, they may say, well, you really only played one true playoff contender and they beat you at your place. So there's that too. But yeah, that's a tough one. I'm going to cheat and say I don't want to lose any of them. I think if you're going to lose a game, honestly, if you're going to lose one game, I'd rather not beat any of those teams. I'd rather it be an upset to NC State in game 3. You know what I mean? Right. Or you lose to Louisville on the road, because you were down some guys, and then you follow that up by beating USC and Clemson. I mean, that's been the formula in the past, right? I mean, Ohio State beat Michigan and beat Penn State, Michigan State when they were good, but then they'd go lose to Purdue or Iowa or something like that, and Clemson, the year that they won the title, lost at home in November to Pitt and still got to the playoff. They lost a 4-8 game. They lost to a 4-8 Syracuse team in 2017 and still made the playoff. But they beat all the good teams, and that's why they got in the playoff. So, yeah, I mean, because I don't care who Notre Dame loses to, Ryan. If they beat Ohio State, Clemson, and USC, I don't see how 11-1 Notre Dame's not in the playoff. I don't care who they lose to. I just don't see it.
Yeah.
So, it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
I think it's
give me the good wins
place.
over the Give me the good wins over the bad losses.
Agree 100%. Yep. I think that's a great way to wrap us up today. We want to thank everybody before we get out of here. Thank you so much for the questions, being with us today. Before you leave, do not leave yet. 6:00 tonight, IB Nation Sports Talk. Make sure that you subscribe to this podcast and hit that notification bell so that it brings it right to you. Hit that like button, of course, as always. If you're listening to us on one of your favorite podcast platforms, 5-star reviews are very much appreciated. Please go to boards.irishbreakdown.com. You know that there is going to be more and more official visits set up, more team intel for the offseason. A lot of great information that you want to go to. Yes, and some new film
I'm going to have
rooms.
another one up today, by the way.
Nice. Brian, make sure to check out Brian's film rooms as well. He just had a couple great pieces on Sam Hartman and his deep ball. Some nice cut-ups on there. Some things that you're not going to get just at irishbreakdown.com.
Yeah.
So you need to go subscribe at boards.irishbreakdown.com.
You won't get it here on the show. You won't get it at irishbreakdown.com. It's all 22. It's only on the message board.
And it's incredibly affordable. So make sure you go check out boards.irishbreakdown.com. So from Brian, I am Ryan. We want to thank you all again so much for joining us today on the Irish Breakdown podcast.